All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 20th, 2025 regular meeting of the Boulder City Council. Start with a quick announcement, which is about the boards and commissions recruitment, just to let you all know that the application period is now closed, but the interviews have begun and they will conclude on February 28th. Recordings will be posted to the city's website as they happen. Once posted, they can be viewed at bouldercolorado.gov/boards-and-commissions-interviews. Final appointments will take place at the March 20th regular council meeting. Thank you to everyone that applied. And as always, if you have any questions, please contact the city clerk's office at bouldercolorado.gov or call 303-441-3008. I will now go ahead and call us to order and ask Elisha to please take the roll call.
Yes, sir. And thank you. And good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight's roll call as usual with Councilmember Adams.
Present.
Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Present.
Councilmember Marquis.
Present.
Shuhard.
Here.
Spear.
Present.
Wallach.
Here.
And Weiner.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much. I'd like to start for asking for a motion to amend the agenda, and bear with me, please. We got a few things here. The first is to replace item 1B, a declaration condemning Muslim hate, with declaration item A, the Ramadan declaration, to be presented by Councilmember Adams. To add item 3E, consideration of a motion authorizing the city attorney to appoint special counsel to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute all complaints related to a code of conduct complaint filed pursuant to 2710 CBRC 1981. And finally, to remove item 8A, discussion and a request for a Nota 5 to revisit the city's snow policy.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. All right, I think I got 9 there. And just to be clear that more work is being done on the declaration condemning Muslim hate, and we look forward to that coming back at a future meeting. So stay tuned for that one. All right, if we can go to our item 1A, please, which is Rare Disease Day declaration presented by Councilmember Spear.
Thank you. And do we have our recipients here?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, Katie. Thanks for being with us. I am honored to present Katie Etter with Sophie's Neighborhood with this declaration for Rare Disease Day. I have a personal story to help illustrate why Rare Disease Day is so important. Last fall, one of my children had chest pain and trouble breathing. We took him to urgent care where they listened to his chest, checked his oxygen, and did an x-ray. In less than an hour, we were out the door with a care plan and antibiotics to treat his pneumonia. More common diseases, like my son's pneumonia, are quickly diagnosed, well-studied, and have standard proven treatments that medical providers around the world know. 1 in 10 Americans living with a rare disease has a very different experience. Diagnoses can take months to years for people with rare diseases, as their symptoms are mistaken for more common illnesses and treatments are tried and failed. Experts who know how to assess and address symptoms of rare diseases are few and far between, if they exist at all. Cures and treatments are often non-existent because treating a rare disease that impacts a relatively small number of people is not profitable. This difference in diagnosis, care, and treatment isn't fair. Whether someone has pneumonia or multicentric carpotarsal osteolysis, they deserve a quick diagnosis, knowledgeable medical providers, and effective evidence-based treatments. Rare Disease Day reminds us to advocate for fairness in our medical system. While we work toward fairness, organizations like Sophie's Neighborhood fill the gap by funding research for treatments and cures, educating medical professionals and care providers, and supporting individuals and families. Katie, thank you so much for supporting those with multicentric carpotarsal osteolysis and helping us raise awareness of the inequities people with rare diseases face. We would love it if you would tell us more about your work and how the community can help.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole, and good evening, everyone. My name is Katie, and I am honored to be accepting this declaration on behalf of Sophie's Neighborhood tonight. Sophie's Neighborhood is a Boulder-based nonprofit dedicated for fundraising for research into the development of an effective treatment or cure for 7-year-old Sophie Rosenberg's rare genetic disorder. While the Rosenbergs are out of town and we're unable to join us tonight, I can assure you that the gratitude they feel for the city recognizing the 28th as Rare Disease Day is immense. I joined Sophie's Neighborhood as a volunteer in September of 2022, a few months after beginning my career at SomaLogic. At the time, I was struggling to connect the work I was doing in the lab to real-world applications. I understood that the mission of the company was to transform human health through the power of proteomics, but how exactly were we doing that? After receiving blood samples from Sophie's Neighborhood in our lab and recognizing that I had just recently seen this organization's name on the menu at a local restaurant, I decided to do some research and ended up reaching out to see how I could help. Lauren, the founder of Sophie's Neighborhood and Sophie's mom, followed up with me shortly thereafter and invited me to attend a local fundraising event with her later that week. She shared Sophie's story with me and how Sophie at the time was one of only 30 individuals worldwide to be diagnosed with multicentric carpotarsal osteolysis, or MCTO, which is a rare, progressively crippling genetic bone and kidney disorder. She highlighted the challenges they faced from a misdiagnosis to the lack of public knowledge and specialized care for the condition. She also shared that there was and still is not an FDA-approved treatment capable of stopping the destruction MCTO threatens. I soon learned that these challenges are not unique only to MCTO, but are shared by the broader rare disease community. And as the declaration calls out, there are over 10,000 diseases and conditions considered to be rare within the United States. Funding sources such as the NIH and pharmaceutical companies struggle to prioritize research of rare disease due to low profit potential, and therefore rare disease research relies heavily on fundraisers and charitable donations to bridge this funding gap. I encourage the community to learn more about rare disease and the struggle these patients face on a daily basis. I encourage the community to advocate and raise awareness for those affected. And during a time of such uncertainty among the NIH, rare disease research will count on community support now more than ever. If you have the means to support, I encourage you to do so. Thank you to the MEGs and the City of Boulder for working with us to recognize this day. I had initially planned to hand out Sophie's Neighborhood postcards, but we are no longer in person, so I'm going to share a link to the Sophie's Neighborhood website. Thank you all.
Thank you, Katie. And also we have an actual physical declaration that's signed by the mayor.
Okay.
And I expect that the city will work on getting that to you as well. So thank you so much.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, Katie, thanks so much for joining us and for your work in this area. It's so incredibly important. Okay, we are now going to go to item 1B, which is the Ramadan Declaration presented by Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor Brockett. Ramadan is the 9th lunar month of the Islamic calendar and marks a month-long spiritual journey celebrated by Muslims in Boulder and worldwide. Observers engage in daily prayer and fasting from before sunrise to sunset to help bring awareness to the experience of vulnerable community members facing hardship. Ramadan lasts 29 to 30 days based on the timing of the astrological moon's new moon, Families and communities come together in celebration and worship, demonstrating the rich and diverse traditions of Muslim societies and cultures. This month promotes reflection and renewal and reinforces patience, perseverance, gratitude, compassion, forgiveness, and love. It is a time to engage in generous acts of charity and service to highlight the need to support one another in the community, and especially individuals facing challenges like hunger and poverty, disease, and conflict. This shared commitment to faith and acts of kindness seeks to bridge the differences between people and bring hope to all. we, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare February 28th to March 30th, 2025 as Ramadan, signed by our mayor, Aaron Brockett.
Thanks so much for that, Taisha. And I believe we have someone here to receive the declaration. Linda, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
And is Farah here as well?
Farah was not able to make it, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to lift up Farah at the
Yes.
Islamic Center of Boulder, who
Yes,
we've also
absolutely.
been working with as well. So
Yeah.
I know you were. I was just asking
Yeah.
for her.
Are
But
you
thank
guys
you.
able?
So
I'm sorry, you able to see me as well, or is it a little?
yeah, there's like a little, like a bit of like we can see you, but there's like the whole full screen is not there, but we can see you.
We can see you, Linda. Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay, there.
Oh, that's better.
Okay, thank you guys. All those hats belong to my kids, by the way. So just saying. I want to start by saying Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. I'd like to express my acceptance, gratitude, and thanks to the Boulder City Council for reading the Ramadan Declaration. This is a very important step in recognizing our Muslim community and the importance of the fasting month of Ramadan. Ramadan is a month where Muslims all over the world reconnect and get closer to our Creator by fasting, which entails abstaining from food and water from dusk till sunset. It is a month where we increase our acts of, rather than from dawn till sunset. It is a month where we increase our acts of worship, such as reading the Quran, praying, and giving charity. During this month, we also increase other acts of worship, such as feeding the hungry, being kind to our neighbors, visiting the sick, clothing the needy. Even something as simple as a smile is considered charity in Islam. At the same time, we disengage from other acts that are considered harmful, such as backbiting, swearing and cursing, being rude or lewd, and other such acts. Another important part of Ramadan is when we break our fast and resume eating and drinking after sunset. A lot of Muslims break their fast in the mosque with the rest of the Muslim community or at home with extended family. Most mosques in Colorado hold this breakfast meal called iftar for the entire community. During this month, we greet each other with the greeting of Ramadan Kareem or Ramadan Mubarak. Finally, we would like to formally invite all the members of the Boulder City Council to come and join us for an iftar this Ramadan and get to know our Muslim community by breaking bread together. It would be our honor and our pleasure to host you. And when I say we, I speak on behalf of the Islamic Center of Boulder as well. Unfortunately, Imam Nader and Sister Farah, who represent ICB, were not able to attend today's acceptance of the reading of the declaration, but certainly that doesn't take away from the desire of our community to welcome you. And the great news is that we offer iftar every single day of the month. Ramadan can be 29 or 30 days, and we hope that you will be coming anytime that you're able to. Of course, there will be a formal invitation for you on a specific evening, but we would love for you to feel like you can drop in anytime as your neighbors and as your community members. And lastly, I'd like to emphasize, as mentioned earlier, we refrain from engaging in any harmful behaviors and elevating those behaviors or those treatments of others that are going to bring us together in solidarity as a community. And that ultimately is what Ramadan is about. Thank you.
Well, Linda, thanks so much for joining us and for those words. Really appreciate you being here today. And I personally look forward to taking you up on that invitation and joining you all at the mosque during Ramadan. Okay. With that, that brings our declarations to a close, and we're ready for open comment. So Alicia, if you can read our participation guidelines, please.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, sir. And good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I will now go over the public participation and city council guidelines. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit our website at bouldercolorado.services/productive-atmosphere. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Our remarks and testimonies shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. And lastly, obscenity, other epithets based on race, gender, or religion, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes this meeting will not be tolerated. Thank you for listening, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that, Alicia. We have 20 people signed up to speak. Each speaker will get 2 minutes. And just so everybody's aware, I'm going to be strict about that time limit in the interest of fairness for all involved. So our first 3 speakers are Mark Parsons, Michelle Rodriguez, and Robert Toney.
This is Mark. Should I get going?
Yes.
Okay, hi. My name is Mark Parsons. I am a longtime Boulder resident. I request that City Council conduct a study session on implementing proportional representation for council elections. Proportional representation is a much more equitable form of democracy than what we have now. In proportional representation, or PR, the makeup of the legislative body, like City Council, is roughly proportional to the makeup of the community that they represent. We usually think of this in terms of political parties, like Democrats have 30%, Greens have 10%, etc. But in a nonpartisan body like council, it would be more in line with different communities: renters, merchants, homeowners, students, conservationists, etc. PR enables a diversity of voices. So understandably, there's been a growing interest in electoral reform across the country. But none of the recent initiatives like Colorado Proposition 131 or Boulder's instant runoff selection for mayor have tried to implement a more proportional form of representation. I think this is an opportunity for Boulder to illustrate improved democracy. Change comes from below. So PR is implemented all over the world, and it'd be relatively easy to implement with council's multi-winner election. So I encourage you to schedule a study session on how implementing PR in Boulder might work. The local League of Women Voters has a voting methods team that would be willing to help compile and organize information and take some of the burden off staff.
And how do I get this rubber band back on?
I look forward, thanks. I look forward to
Where am I? Where am I?
Thank you. All right, we got a little bit of background noise that maybe somebody needs to be muted, but it's gone now. Okay. Our next 3 speakers are Michelle Rodriguez, Robert Toney, and Linda Bhagwan.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay, first off tonight, I wanted to express my sincerest condolences to the family, loved ones, and fellow students in the community, first responders, and everybody involved in the search and recovery of the young lady, Megan, the CU student who was found deceased. It's a pain and a loss no mother should know. Also, I wanted to highlight and bring to light the brutal unaliving of Zariah Hardy, who was she was killed in Boulder on July 10th of last year. We had a recent arrest of her alleged assaulter and 2 other confessions. We now have 1 gentleman in custody on a $10 million bond. Zariah's case isn't getting the notoriety that the other young girls did, but every parent deserves support. They charged that man with first-degree murder, trafficking for sexual servitude, and 4 sentence enhancers. The 2 people that confessed to contributing to that crime, 2 other people, her boyfriend being one of them, has not been charged yet. We need to make sure they have justice, and I implore the community to reach out, look online for GoFundMe for justice for Zariah. Her family really needs our support financially and in every other way. The warrant was published on 9 News, something else nobody should have to find out the gruesome details of on the public media. But thank you guys, and I do appreciate the work of the city authorities in getting those that have been in custody. Y'all have a blessed night.
Thank you. Now we have Robert Tony, Linda Badwan, and Jonathan Lamar.
Mayor, I do not see Rob online tonight.
Let's go to Linda Badwan then.
Linda, it looks like you're unmute if you would like to start speaking.
Okay, I'm really sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. Once again, I wanted to have the opportunity to speak tonight as a Muslim woman and as a Palestinian woman in the community. I was really hopeful that we were going to be able to introduce a joint declaration against hate for both our Muslim and Jewish communities, and worked very hard on that along with our Jewish community members nearly a year ago. And unfortunately, this did not come to fruition. And instead, I'm very disappointed and hurt that we were not able to read a declaration condemning Muslim hate this evening. It has been very hurtful for me as a Muslim community member to see that the process for which the declarations have been brought up in the past it's not the same process that we are being now treated with. We were supposed to have this read today, and it's extremely disappointing, and I don't understand the unequal treatment and the bias with which this has come forth, as it was not treated in the same way for other declarations, including the one on anti-Semitism. Today's declaration against Muslim hate would have brought our communities together. It is absolutely only about solidarity, and there was no harm in the language to anybody in the community. It was about bringing us together and creating a bridge, and most importantly, creating a safe space for all of us to come together and work together as a community as part of the healing that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Jonathan Lamar, Jim Linfield, and Jackie Richardson.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here to talk about potential protections for renters that I think the City Council could research and potentially find things that they could very easily do within their power would bring the rising cost of rent under control and provide protections for renters. So I've lived in the Boulder area since 2012. I currently live in Louisville for affordability reasons, but I commute in and out of Boulder most days, and that's really where my heart is in the area. For about half of that time, I was a grad student worker. I earned less than $20,000 a year, and I have direct experience with the high cost of living, which you can imagine. During that time, I got by moving into smaller and less strictly legal living arrangements to keep costs manageable as rents increase much faster than my income. I'm a decent person. I play by the rules, but I've felt the squeeze directly and personally. As a concerned resident of the area, I'm asking the City Council to research 3 plans of action. One would be to expand the Tenant Advisory Committee. The TAC, which was set up by the newer law passed in 2020, could be used a lot more effectively if they had higher meeting frequency and more members. I think that they could also advocate for renter rights in the area. I also think that the City Council should pass a law similar to the Tacoma, Washington Tenant Bill of Rights, which provides relocation assistance for rent hikes over 5%. That would effectively get around the statewide rent control ban and bring the cost of living increases under control. And finally, I think that we could easily fund both of these things by taxing vacant homes. We have 3,000 to 4,000 in the area. They're easy to detect by looking at water usage, and they shouldn't be sitting unused when we have a cost of living crisis and a crisis of unhoused people in the area. We should tax them and fund protections. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Jim Linfield, Jackie Richardson, and Mila Sikorsky.
Good evening. In the middle of the night on February 8th, a city water main burst a few feet from my mother's home and flooded the entire basement, causing tens of thousands of dollars of damage. Joy Linfield is a 96-year-old retired kindergarten teacher who's lived here since 1966, probably some of her former students online. She's an amazing person who's contributed a lot to this community over 60 years. Since that time, no one from the city has asked how she's doing. No one from the city has said that they're sorry about this. No one from the city has offered any help. Instead, what we've gotten from the city's outsourced claims agent is basically CYA, and in substance, it sucks to be you. We have evidence that at least one part of the main was improperly installed in the first instance, but I'm not here to get into forensics. I'd really like to avoid that for everyone's sake. In 2016, a water main burst on Norwood Avenue and flooded a number of basements. While not acknowledging liability, the city did cover losses for homeowners in what the city then described as the act of a good neighbor. I told your outsourced claim agent about this. She said, well, things have changed, and we had a global pandemic, and they couldn't consider this. Unbelievable. So I have 3 questions for council to think about. One is, did council really adopt that as a policy position, or did the agent just make that up? Does council really think it's okay to stick my mother with tens of thousands of dollars in damage from a city water main? And are Boulder's days of being a good neighbor really over? As a next step, I think we deserve an honest conversation with the city manager's office and or the city attorney's office. Can we expect that? Roberto, Naria, feel free to raise your hand.
Thank you. We will now go to, and there will be responses, by the way, city staff at the end of the open comment period. Now we have Jackie Richardson, Mila Sikorsky, and Tucker Eckhoff.
Hey there, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so hi there, City Council. I'm here to follow up on John's comment about tenant protections in Boulder. Similar to John, I've been living in the Boulder area since I came here as a grad student in 2004. Even a couple decades back, rent was onerous and has gotten exponentially worse in the intervening 2 decades. So to alleviate the housing crisis, a few years back, we took steps to pass the No Eviction Without Representation, or newer bill, which is paid for by a $75 rental license fee. And this provides some absolutely crucial legal services and rental assistance for people facing eviction, which can be life-ruining and really mess up people's chances of finding housing in the future. This bill also set up a Tenants Advisory Committee, or TAC, to ensure that newer is fulfilled and also decide how to distribute rental assistance. Excuse me. The city's dashboard about evictions has shown this to be a resounding success, and it's cut the odds of eviction from 43% without representation to only 4% with representation. So it's doing a lot to keep people in their homes. However, it's gone some of the way, but it could still be better. And so I'd like to ask City Council to look into ways of further strengthening tenant protections and shielding people from the worst effects of inflation, especially over the last few years. So the changes that we'd like to see made are, first of all, expanding the TAC from 5 members to 7 and increasing their meeting frequency. This would give them more bandwidth to address issues as they come up and with shorter sort of response time. The second part is expanding tenant protections against eviction. And the city of Tacoma achieved this recently by requiring landlords who want to increase rent by more than 5% to provide relocation assistance. And then finally, pursuing a ballot measure that would disincentivize leaving residential premises vacant because there are 4,000 or 5,000 vacant houses in the city.
Thank you. Now we have Mila Sikorsky, Tucker Eckhoff, and Miri Kornfeld.
Hi everyone, my name is Mila and I'm following off of Jackie's testimony just now. So as she mentioned, in 2020, the city of Boulder approved the no evictions without representation ordinance, which was a resounding success. But there are areas where we could enhance the law and enhance protections for both tenants and landlords. So we're asking City Council to explore the legality and possibility of taking the following actions that Jackie and John laid out. So a big one is expanding the duties, meeting frequency, and membership of the Tenant Advisory Committee. Also, like Jackie mentioned, looking at the lessons learned from Tacoma and expanding tenant protections through a tenant bill of rights, especially since Boulder does not have a rent control law. And then third, pursuing a ballot measure to tax unoccupied residential premises. And we also ask the city to update the public on its findings and engage with stakeholders and community members as a whole. I also asked the City Council if they could oppose House Bill 1208, the tipped worker wage theft bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now we have Tucker Eckhoff, Miri Kornfeld, and Alex Weinheimer.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hello, City Council. My name is Tucker Eckhoff. I am a Boulder native, and I'm here to show support for more human prioritized, car light, and car-free spaces in Boulder for the safety and comfort of people. I have been fortunate enough to travel to many other cities around the world. In every city, my favorite places have always been designed for people to walk, to shop, to play, and to interact with others. There might even be buses or trams moving through the area at slow speeds. Fundamentally, these places have all been built for people to be comfortable being human without worrying for their safety or the safety of their family, friends, or neighbors. I believe that Boulder is capable of doing this as well. I see it on Pearl Street and at the farmers market. I see it on the CU Boulder campus. I saw it on West Pearl too, when it was closed to cars. I would plead to this City Council that Boulder commit to creating and expanding such places where anyone might walk, bike, bus, and wheelchair, where we can enjoy people, shopping, or just taking in the world over a cup of coffee. I believe that expanding the human prioritized areas in and around Pearl Street would be a great place to start. I would ask that this City Council value the safety and potential of the humble pedestrian over convenience for cars, as those other wonderful, successful, and thriving places around the world have. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Miri Kornfeld, Alex Weinheimer, and Stephanie Clark.
My name is Miri. I'm the director of Stand With Us in Colorado. We work with students and communities all over Boulder and the rest of Colorado and do Israel education and fight anti-Semitism. I have followed these weekly council meetings, and the only way I can describe them is a weekly anti-Israel roadshow that's taken over these meetings. To our regular performers who show up like clockwork, your obsession with Jews is genuinely fascinating. You've chosen to spend every precious minute of public comment spreading hate about Israel and the Jewish people, taking time away from locals who actually want to speak about local matters. But clearly you don't care about any of that. Here's what's most revealing. You got your ceasefire. Israel and Hamas are literally right in the middle of the longest ceasefire yet since October 7th, 2023, which, by the way, Hamas just violated this morning, returning the body of someone who's not Shiri Bibas. Yet you come week after week still ranting and raving. If it was truly about humanitarian concerns, about peace, what are you still doing? But take off your masks. For those of you who haven't seen through those masks, this was never really about a ceasefire. It was just a convenient banner for you to rally under while spreading racism against Jews, or more accurately stated, anti-Semitism. The Boulder City Council exists to serve our entire community, not a stage for your obsession. Our city deserves better. On the other hand, I'd like to thank the majority of city council members here for voting against the quote, not BDS bill, couched as a quote, reviewing the city's investment policies. Again, we saw through the mask, and thank you to those on city council who saw through it as well. BDS is a global campaign with one goal, the defamation and eventual elimination of Israel. It seeks to do this by creating bias against Israel that will harm Israel politically, culturally, and economically, and thus lead to its collapse. BDS perpetuates the conflict, and it does not lead to peace in the end. If you don't believe it from me, hear it from the mouths of the leadership. They'll tell you straight from their mouths. The leader of the BDS movement says we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine. Again, let's go back to what matters in Boulder locally, which is the purview of the city council.
Right, our next three speakers are Alex Weinheimer, Stephanie Clark, and Nick Aguilera.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Alex Weinheimer, and I'm speaking in favor of the city creating more public spaces on our downtown streets. Those of you who are on City Council in 2022 witnessed the overwhelming support for keeping West Pearl open to people. I was chair of the Transportation Advisory Board at the time, and we received a similar influx of support for creating more public spaces. During the pandemic, I was proud to see how quickly the city responded and unlocked a wonderful new space for our community to gather. While the vehicular closure was imperfect, a collaborative effort between the city and downtown stakeholders could have successfully addressed any challenges with ADA, transit, or business access. As West Pearl was reverted back to primarily street parking, there was a guarantee from the city to investigate future opportunities for our downtown streets as public spaces on West Pearl and throughout downtown. Unfortunately, in 2023, the city hosted a series of expensive pop-up social streets events on Pearl and 13th Street, where the farmers market is, that were typically poorly attended. Also, by replicating street closures that have already been deployed, we failed to learn anything new about our streets. By the time Council got the social streets summary in 2024, no worthwhile actions had been identified for the city to pursue. Today, 5 years after the initial pedestrianization of West Pearl, we have seen no noticeable progress in improving our downtown streets. As the 50th anniversary of the Pearl Street Mall approaches, I hope you all recognize and honor the overwhelming appetite from our community and collaborate with downtown stakeholders to create the next generation of public spaces downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Stephanie Clark, Nick Aguilera, and Adrienne Fine.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tonight, I'm sharing a letter to Council Member Taisha Adams, signed by nearly 400 Boulder residents who are deeply concerned about the persistent efforts to advance international political agendas through our city government, rather than focusing on local issues that directly impact our community. These residents represent a broad cross-section of our city who believe it's time to refocus council priorities on the critical local challenges, and it was sent to the entire council by email tonight. We, the undersigned members of the Boulder community, write to express our profound disappointment in your continued efforts to advance an anti-Israel agenda through our city government. Your recent proposal to review Boulder's investment portfolio following your unsuccessful attempts to pass a ceasefire resolution demonstrates the persistent pattern of using your elected position to promote anti-Israel policies rather than addressing the local issues that impact Boulder residents' daily lives. Boulder prides itself on being a welcoming, inclusive community that celebrates diversity and fosters understanding across all groups. Yet your actions directly contradict those core values. You've chosen to prioritize divisive international politics over municipal governance, and your actions have created an increasingly hostile environment for Boulder's Jewish community. This is particularly concerning given your role as Sister City Liaison, where objectivity and community bridge building should be paramount. Your singular focus on this agenda while failing to acknowledge the complexities of the situation or show equal concern for all members of our community raises serious questions about your ability to represent all Boulder residents fairly and effectively. We call on you to please refocus your attention on local government responsibilities for which you were elected. Our city faces numerous challenges that require dedicated leadership, from housing affordability and homelessness to transportation infrastructure and climate action. These are the issues that should command your time and energy as a council member. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have Nick Aguilera, Adrian Fine, and Mindy Miller.
Hey all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, City Council. My name is Nick Aguilera. I'm speaking as a resident of Boulder. When I moved to Boulder during the pandemic, West Pearl quickly became one of my favorite places to sit, walk, and spend time. Like hundreds of other residents, I fell in love with the street as a vibrant, welcoming public space that felt like nothing else in the city. But today I go there much less often than I did during the closure. As an urban planning teacher assistant in Spain, I studied what makes great public spaces work. During the Fulbright Mid-Year Conference in Valencia, I presented to scholars and teachers about how policies like parking and zoning requirements shape our cities. One of the reasons so many of us love Spain? Streets that prioritize people, not cars. That's exactly what we experienced on West Pearl during its closure, a space that felt safe, inviting, connected, and alive. For decades, we have prioritized the automobile, sacrificing vast portions of our built environment to pavement and parking. But cities thrive when we design for people first. Closing West Pearl to private vehicles was framed as a short-term solution to a public health crisis. But as we quote-unquote return to normal meant prioritizing the automobile for the majority of our street space. Thank you for your work to create safer ways for people to walk, bike, take transit, and roll across Boulder. I know I'm not alone in wanting more people-first spaces, and I'm glad to see the Pearl for You campaign pushing to make West Pearl an inviting community space once again. I hope the energy behind this campaign shows you just how deeply people want human-centered streets and public spaces throughout the city of Boulder. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Adrian Fine, Mindy Miller, and Myrna Morales.
Hi, City Council. My name is Adrian Fine. I live in North Boulder, and I'm speaking in support of the Pearl for You initiative. The name is great, right? It's about devoting some of our city's best blocks to people. Could be people in strollers, walking, or on skateboards, but a bit more diverse, and the cars are the only allowed users today. I don't think it has to be an either or, though, and this is about, as the last speaker mentioned, like moving away from a monoculture where streets are only used for parking and cars to a more diverse set of uses and rules. You all know many cities tried this in the 70s. Most of them failed, and Boulder didn't. And the Pearl Street Mall succeeded because it has dense foot traffic, strong local businesses, and a connected street grid that supports the movement around it. It is a model that works. And I don't think any issue ignited Americans' imagination about what their cities could be as much during COVID as much as like pedestrian openings, right? Like cities across America experimented with this, and then they stopped, and so have we. Those spaces were universally loved, and for good reason. And I think that's why this initiative will gather good and rapid support. So right now, while West Pearl is dedicated to cars and parking, why not explore a more balanced approach? There are many spaces across the city for cars and for parking, and I think we can flex with a few blocks here. Experimenting with public spaces keeps our community vibrant and adaptable, and I think that's important. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now we have Mindy Miller, Myrna Morales, and Rukia Nyom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, this is Mindy Miller. I'm a resident of Boulder. I would like to address the process around the Islamophobia declaration that should have been presented tonight. A declaration whose intent we wholeheartedly support. While meant to focus on the Muslim community and protections, it referenced Jews 7 times without any consultation or communication with Jewish community members. For any other marginalized community, we would insist on inclusion. As the saying goes, nothing about us without us. We would love nothing more than to build bridges between our communities, but this process was entirely one-sided. If the intent was to bring our communities together, then actually bring us together. What was the process here? The declaration wasn't posted until just 48 hours before the meeting, unlike the anti-Semitism declaration, which was posted with the agenda a week ahead of time. Please don't gaslight us about separate processes. This lack of transparency and rushed timeline prevented meaningful discussion and unfortunately created new tensions. What should have been straightforward and simple has instead become yet another distraction from pressing local issues that require our immediate attention. We hope that you are able to bring forward a true Islamophobia declaration that gives the community the protections and respect they deserve. But in the meantime, let's please direct our energy toward problems where we can make meaningful change in our community. And please stop fanning and encouraging divisiveness. Thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Now we have Myrna Morales, Rokia Nyom, and Aiden Reed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Myrna Morales, and I'm a resident of Boulder County. I'm here to speak out against the tip offset bill, a dangerous, unjust piece of legislation that would slash wages for tip workers and worsen economic inequality in Boulder County and beyond. This bill would cut Boulder's already low tipped wages, making it even harder for workers to afford rent, food, childcare, and healthcare. Who does this impact the most? Women, people of color, and immigrant workers, those who are already disproportionately affected by wage theft, financial insecurity, and economic discrimination. As a woman of color, I know all too well how exhausting it is to constantly fight to be valued, to prove my labor is worth fair pay, and to demand what should already be given economic dignity and respect. We are forced to advocate for ourselves over and over in an economy that would rather exploit us than recognize our worth. This bill is yet another example of how this system undermines us, forcing those who already struggle to work even harder just to survive. And let's be honest, Boulder already has a hard time facilitating diversity. The cost of living here continues to push out working class people, especially Black and Brown communities, making it harder for people from different backgrounds to thrive. If we truly want a more inclusive and equitable Boulder, we must create conditions that allow for diverse communities to stay, work, build a future here. Cutting wages for tip workers does the opposite. It reinforces the racial and economic barriers that make Boulder inaccessible to many. Let's talk about who are tip workers. They're servers, bartenders, hotel delivery workers, and caretakers. They're the very people who sustain our lives. At its core, their work is an act of care, and care is a foundation of democracy. Democracy is not just about representation, it is about ensuring that labor of care is valued, protected, and fairly compensated. Tip wage system itself is rooted in white supremacy, deliberately lowering wages for the workforce made up largely of BIPOC and marginalized workers. This is systemic racism in action. Thank you, Councilman Member Adams, for all that you do.
Your time's up, but thank you for your testimony. All right, now we have Rokia Nyom, Aiden Reed, and Lauren Feldman.
Mayor, I do not see Rokia online tonight.
Let's go to Aiden then.
Good evening, Council. My name is Aiden. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm here this evening to urge Council to commission a city study to explore the legality of several measures to improve the rights of renters, particularly those facing eviction. First, please expand the Tenant Advisory Committee from 5 members to 7, expand tenant protections against eviction, and tax the roughly 4,000 vacant homes that are currently sitting in Boulder. Next, I want to urge Council to please oppose HB 25-1208, the tipped worker wage theft bill. It was not designed with the impacted communities or workers in mind. It will cost workers $2 an hour, which is up to $4,000 per year, which is nothing short of wage theft and completely criminal in a place like Boulder. And it is not being pushed by workers, it is being pushed by restaurant owners. This is going to cost workers, it's going to cost the local economy, and it'll ultimately cost Boulder. And I don't think that's what any of us want. Lastly, I'd like to urge Council to, as an earlier speaker, Linda Badwan, urged you, to please actually get to know Boulder's Muslim community so that you might be better familiar with them and their experiences, and more importantly, to ensure that they are part of the process of drafting the declaration that should have been read tonight, but was not. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last 2 speakers are Lauren Feldman and Laura Gonzalez.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Lauren Lambert Feldman, and I live in the city of Boulder. Thank you, Mayor Brockett and members of council for the very important work you all do. I've been wondering, along with so many other members of our community, how far we've come on the 2024 to 2025 City Council priorities that Council agreed upon. It seems that the energy and time has been consumed by so many other matters outside of the core work plan, and there is little control over the agenda. The matters you all chose to address in 2024 and 2025 were and are the core of your work and your responsibility as our elected officials. Homelessness, economic vitality, fire mitigation, climate action, and the comprehensive plan. These are the issues you decided to work on and rightfully should be working on. This is where you have expert staff, legal authority, and a healthy budget. There are countless other matters that are of great importance to all of us, as you've heard during open comment tonight. I urge you to focus on fire mitigation before the next wildfire consumes our city. Focus on economic vitality before another family business goes under. Focus on homelessness before another person freezes to death on our streets. Let's please get on with the official business of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Laura Gonzalez.
Mayor, I do not see Laura online tonight.
All right, well then that concludes open comment. Thanks everyone for coming out and speaking with us this evening. So I'll turn to city staff to see if there are any responses.
Good evening, Council. Chris Meschuk, Deputy City Manager, while Nuria is in transit here. Appreciate everyone who came to speak tonight in open comment. Just one item from me related to the water main break, and I do know that our utilities director is aware of that situation. And to Jim, I'm sorry to hear about the impact to your mother's house, and we're aware of that and tracking that claims process. And so I know Joe is in the loop on that. And with that, that was all I have for tonight.
Roberta, anything from the city attorney's office?
No, thank you.
Very good. Just muted myself. All right, let's move to the consent agenda, please.
Buttons. All right, Mayor, thank you. Our consent agenda is item number 3 on the night's agenda, and it consists of items 3A through 3E.
Any questions or comments on the consent agenda from folks? Ryan?
On item A, which is the summary of our discussion about AMPS on January 23rd, I'd like to request to add a few words to capture an aspect of parking that we discussed. It's on packet page 14, which has a summary of council comments to staff's 3 questions. And it's the third question, which asks for feedback about on-street parking. The second bullet says, one council member expressed interest in preferential parking and pricing based on vehicle size and weight. I believe that was me. There was a second part that I'd like to add that we capture, and it would be to say something like, and to use pricing to induce at least one space per block is open, something along those lines. And this is a comment that represents that we know there are evidence-based methods to create more parking beyond that of physical construction, and that staff should be encouraged to use that tool. So I'd request to make that addition. Thank you.
Lisa, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just acknowledging that we can make that update. So thanks.
Great. And can you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Yeah, sorry. Lisa Hood, Principal City Planner, Planning and Development Services.
Thanks so much. Any other comments or a motion on the consent agenda?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Elisha, can we do a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. We'll start tonight's roll call for the consent agenda items 3A through 3E with you, Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkert. Mayor Pro Tem Folkert.
Yes.
Councilmember Marquis.
Yes.
Shuhard.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Yes.
Weiner,
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
and Benjamin.
Yes.
The consent agenda items 3A through 3E are hereby approved unanimously.
Thanks so much. Can we go to our first call-up check-in, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our call-up check-ins are item number 4 on tonight's agenda. 4A is the concept plan review for a proposal to redevelop the Mountain View United Methodist Church property at 355 Ponca Place with a new 170,000 square foot addition to the Fraser Retirement Community at 350 Ponca Place. The new 4-story, 55-foot addition would contain 55 independent living apartments with 2 levels of underground parking. The proposal includes demolition of a portion of the existing church building, removal of existing surface parking lots on both 350 and 355 Ponca Place, and vacation of the existing Ponca Place right-of-way.
Thank you. Any questions or comments or desire to call this one up? Lauren?
Just a comment about kind of the amount of underground parking and how that plays into our environmental desires and desires to mode shift. Hopefully the applicant will look into that more as they move forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina, and then I'll call on myself.
Yeah, I have a question about vacating Ponca Place or the Ponca Place. And it says that the vacation criteria isn't met, but with some adjustments, it would meet the criteria. So in this concept plan, is there anything that is requiring those changes to be made, or is not calling it up, mostly saying that we're okay with the vacation of Ponca Place?
Ask Chandler, I think, who is on the line, or Brad.
Yes. Hi. Chandler Vanscock, Principal Planner, Planning and Development Services. I'm not sure why my camera is not working. Oh, there it is. Yes, currently we said that it doesn't meet the criteria for vacation because there's still utilities in the right-of-way. Whether or not you call this up I don't think has an impact on your decision ultimately. When they come back in for site review, if they are still requesting the vacation, they will have to show that the utilities are gone, and we will evaluate the request for vacation against the criteria at the time of site review.
Okay, and then I have a similar question where there is a hope that the public maintains access to the private drive that they're going to create, replacing the public right-of-way. And I have a little bit of sort of civic pad hangover about a future hope. And I'm wondering, is in this moment right now, is there a way that we can require that to move forward? Or is it similar to, we'll see it when it goes under site review? Because I don't want to end up finding out that the private drive does not provide public access, when this is completed.
Yeah. Yeah, it is similar in that it would be something that we would have to work out during site review. I mean, concept review, we can't require anything at this point. It's just them showing us an idea essentially and asking for feedback. But we have raised it as a key issue. So when it did come in for site review, if it does, that would be something we would pursue at that time.
Okay. And then I also share concerns around the parking, the traffic flow in general as related to Ponca Place, and also the comments from Planning Board on design about permeability and the massing of the structures was pretty extensive. So my preference would be to send this to DAB and TAB. But I'm looking to my colleagues to see if there might be support for that.
Thanks, Tina. I'll call on myself and then I'll go to Mark. I have a couple comments and an additional thought. So one is that I thought the Planning Board did have excellent comments and feedback. They did have some detailed levels of feedback, and I thought that was positive. And building on what Tina said, I know we're not requiring anything at this point, but I would think that, to me, I would think in order for the vacation to be something that was acceptable for the city, that we would need to have a strong public access component to whatever replaces that. That seems critically important to me. So I agree with Tina absolutely about the TAB referral. Definitely want to see this referred to TAB and open to the DAB referral as well. And if we do refer it to TAB, I would ask them to look closely at that, the permeability, at the public access through the Ponca area, and then at the parking, the amount of parking, whether that's the appropriate level of parking for the project. And then just close by saying, Chandler, appreciate the dog appearance in the background. That always makes a council meeting a little better.
No problem. She loves it.
All right, I'll go to Mark and Taisha, and then we'll see about a motion or two about referrals.
Yeah, I want to support both Tina and Aaron's request to refer this to TAB and DAB. I complain often about architectural quality, and I will say that this one seemed especially drab, and I would hope that DAB might have some constructive suggestions to make that would make the complex look a little less institutional and a little more welcoming. So I would very much like to submit this project to both bodies and see if they have something constructive to offer in the design of the project.
Very good. Taisha?
Thank you so much. I concur with just about all the things of my colleagues. I'm especially concerned about the underground parking, just the level of disturbance, regardless of whether or not there's a need for or if there's right of way and the utility lines. I just from an environmental perspective, do less is climate resilience at this point. I also just think that we are incentivizing individual cars. Just because it's independent living doesn't mean you're not a part of a community. And so I don't understand why we're not incentivizing shared cars. I mean, I share a car, right? I mean, if we're expanding and if we're trying to create a different culture, then we can't have an infrastructure that reinforces the culture that we're trying to move away from. So that's one component. Then, as far as design is concerned, and although I appreciate inviting the design team, unless they have designers who are experts in the green buildings, then I also would like to call up the Environmental Advisory Board. Now, I don't want to have to call up three different boards. So just the complexity of that is unnecessary. However, I do want to emphasize the greenness of the buildings more than just planting in, native grasses. That is, 101. What's the next level? What is the next level? What's the green line, or excuse me, what's the blue line? That's the expectation at this time. We are past the event horizon. Our commenters mentioned wildfires and all of these things, which I work on every day for our community. And so that's another component that I would like us to look into. And lastly, I don't see any garden beds or anything. And I saw some community open space, but going back to, that's another part of the resilient opportunities that we have. Those gardens and components aren't just for fluff, and they're for health, and they're also for our habitat. So I would love to see a lot more use of space and less of this, blocky, it's not blocky, excuse me. I grew up in New York City as well, but it's giving New York City vibes, and I moved away from that. So I'm hopeful that we can get some improvements on the next go round. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that. All right, not seeing any other hands raised. I'll just go ahead and make a motion that we refer this to the Transportation Advisory Board. And Roberto, can I do one motion for both boards, or do they need to be separate?
It would be best to do it separately.
All right, I move that we refer this to the Transportation Advisory Board. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that looks unanimous. And then while I got the floor, I'll go ahead and move that we refer it to the Design Advisory Board as well.
Second.
Motion is second. Everyone in favor, please raise your hand. And that's okay. I think I got 8 on that one. All right. And then I haven't heard any interest in calling it up. So I think that concludes that item. So if we can go to the next call up, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our next call up is item 4B, and it is the concept plan review and comment request to redevelop the site at 1100 28th Street as a mixed-use standard housing development with 80 to 90 units in the residential high 3 zoning district. The proposal includes a 65% parking reduction request and a height modification request for 55-foot tall buildings. This is reviewed under case number LUR 2024-00063.
Any questions or comments or desire to call this one up? Tina.
Yep, I just had a quick question. There was some thoughts suggested by the planning board around adding more multimodal transportation options and more bike storage and a bike maintenance area. And I am wondering, how are we tracking how those services are being used by inhabitants in other developments that we have? I'm just trying to, and this would be more about like a question I have as we're going into the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, but do we have an idea of what the usage is and what sort of a ratio we would develop over time, rather than broadly saying we'd like to see more of X, but kind of get a better idea of if there are 90 units, we need this much square feet of bike maintenance or, whatever it might be.
We'll invite Shannon to the table or to the party. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, good evening. I'm Shannon Muller with the City of Boulder Planning Department. Yeah, so it sounded like the question was, how are we tracking the use of like bike maintenance stations and things of that nature once they're actually installed? Is that sort of the question?
Yes,
okay.
And bike parking and cutouts for multimodal car sharing, stuff like that.
Yeah. In terms of the city, we do not have like a program in place right now where we're tracking private developments in terms of the use of those facilities. I think our applicant team is here and they might be able to speak to different developments they've done around town, just in terms of, how they see the residents using those and how they monitor that. So we could invite them up if you'd like to hear from them. We have Danica Powell with Trestle Strategy Group. They might be able to share a little bit about that.
Sure, and it would be to eventually get to a point where we can create sort of better guidance around what we're looking for in developments, since we do see the same feedback from planning board pretty consistently.
Great. Yeah, good. I'm not able to promote Danica. I don't know if someone else would want to, just to hear from her.
I can get an email back too, which works as well.
Great.
Sounds good.
Sure.
And we'll take the question, council member.
Thank you.
No, it's good. Lauren.
Thank you. I have some concerns around the restaurant. There's a kind of a subterranean restaurant, and there was a lot of mention of that activating the street, which feels tenuous to me, along with the facade facing Canyon. Feels like it could use a little more human scale, and being broken down a little bit more, which is maybe a strange comment coming from me, but I think it's a pretty big facade. And so I would be interested in referring this to DAB.
All right, I don't see any hands raised. So Lauren, would you like to make the motion to that effect?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we refer this to DAB.
Second.
Motion and a tie for seconds. All in favor, raise your hand, please. We got 8. All right, so we'll refer that one to DAB. Not seeing any other hands, then I think that is it for that one. No desire to call that one up, which means we can go to our first public hearing, please.
All right, thank you, sir. Our public hearings are item number 5 on tonight's agenda. 5A is the second reading and consideration of a motion to amend and pass Ordinance 8684, amending Title 10 Structures of the BRC 1981 and adopting by reference the 2024 International Codes regarding property maintenance, building, electrical, fire, mechanical, fuel, gas, and plumbing, and setting forth related details.
Thanks so much, Alicia. I'm going to send this over to our Director of Planning and Development Services. But before I do that, I just want to say that I got an opportunity to see a little bit of preview of the presentation. And while building code may not be the most exciting thing for most people, I will tell you, I am super excited about these changes and think staff has done a tremendous job. So well done, Rob and the team on this. And with that, Brad, send it over to you because super exciting work.
Thank you, Nuria. And I'll try to recover from my pain at imagining building code isn't exciting, but
we still your heart.
But we'll move on beyond that. Council, we're certainly very excited to bring this to you. As Rob will describe, this is part of a regular rhythm of things, but I did want to just highlight a couple things that I know he'll touch on. You have charged us a year or so ago with looking at codes and ways that they could be simplified, both for understanding and for administration. This is one in a series of those. You saw zoning changes quite a bit earlier, historic preservation, and now building code. Rob and the team has done, in my bias, an excellent job of really stripping out things that have become redundant and otherwise unnecessary. We, as he will also indicate, we'll be bringing the WUI, the Wildfire Urban Interface Code to you later because of the importance of getting community engagement in that in a way that was more expansive than was necessary for this set of codes. But happy to be here tonight, and we'll pass it on to Rob Adrians, the Chief Building Official for the city.
Thanks, Brad. Let me just share my screen here and we'll get the presentation going. Well, good evening, everyone. As Brad mentioned, I'm Rob Adrians with Planning and Development Services, Chief Building Official here for the City of Boulder, and I'll be presenting on the 2024 iCode adoption tonight. So, purpose of our hearing tonight is for a City Council decision on Ordinance 8684. Okay, so moving into this. So, a little background, what are the international codes and how often do we update them? So the international codes are a body of codes developed by the International Code Council through a collaborative process involving experts from fields like construction, engineering, architecture, and industry stakeholders. Proposals for code changes are submitted by the public and reviewed by technical committees which consider factors such as safety, sustainability, cost, and feasibility. After discussions, revisions, and extensive public comment, eligible voting members, which includes government officials and professionals, approve the changes. The finalized codes are then published reflecting the latest technologies, safety standards, and best practices while balancing sustainability and cost effectiveness in construction. The goal is to ensure that buildings are safe, efficient, and environmentally responsible while remaining financially viable for stakeholders. So here in the City of Boulder, that process plays out every 3 years. We adopt codes every 6 years just to sort of minimize the impact on both staff and the development community of having super frequent code changes. So the last time we updated our building codes was in 2019. We went from the 2012 family of codes to the 2018. And then here tonight, we're proposing to go from the 2018 to the 2024 family of building codes. So as staff went through this update, these are sort of our key objectives. Obviously, the one Brad already mentioned was to adopt the codes with as few local amendments as possible to reduce complexity. Historically, we had a lot of local amendments, and what those are changes to the code to suit local conditions or local requirements. The problem with that is it really increased code complexity and increased costs. So we've made a really concerted effort to bring our adoption of the code into alignment with international codes and surrounding jurisdictions as much as possible. Another key priority of ours was to identify and reduce code barriers to racial and socioeconomic equity through the use of the racial equity instrument. As I already mentioned, a goal was to reduce costs by aligning our code with international codes and our surrounding jurisdictions. And really another fundamental goal was to potentially, I mean, I can't promise this, but hopefully reduce future insurance premium increases and to improve building safety for Boulder residents by adopting the most up-to-date building codes. In terms of community feedback and engagement, we first published our intention to do this back in December in the PNDS newsletter. And the first outreach opportunity we had was an open office hours on December 19th. This is more on the engage and consult level. Most of the people that attended this first office hours were local architects and builders. And then on January 8th, we held a second virtual office hours. And this one was also open to the public, but much more broadly attended by a group of local residents, homeowners, landlords, and the aforementioned builders, architects, and design professionals. So in terms of community feedback, we heard a little bit of concern about the proposed timeline and its impact on projects already in a land use process. We heard a lot of positive statements about the reduction of local amendments and the simplification of the ordinance versus previous ordinances. We heard a lot of positive statements about some of the new lower basement and attic ceiling heights for existing buildings, which I'll talk about as we get into the significant changes. We also heard some concerns about the impacts of the new imaginary lot line provisions that are in the IRC regarding ADUs, which I'll also talk about when we get into the significant code changes. These are the family of codes in the updates, so that obviously the most important or an influential one being the International Building Code, but we also have the International Residential Code, the International Fire Code, the Existing Building Code, the Property Maintenance Code, the Fuel Gas Code, the Plumbing Code, Mechanical Code, the National Electric Code, which is just some local amendments. We'd already adopted the latest version of that. And then by reference, we adopt the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code and ANSI 117.1, which is a bit of a mouthful. That's the Accessibility Code. So as Brad already mentioned, you probably noticed that the Wildland Urban Interface Code is not on this list of codes we're adopting at this time. We will be bringing that forward to you in May for adoption. We just need to do a little bit more outreach on that one because some of the potential cost impacts on homeowners in our community. The other code we'll not be bringing forth is the Energy Conservation Code, as we just updated that last year as part of a different ordinance. Okay, so as I said, we tried to eliminate a lot of local amendments, but of course we still created and changed a few. So these are the ones that are really consequential. So one of the things that probably the most important one in terms of wildfire protection is requiring permits for replacement windows and siding. Currently, across the Front Range, Boulder is one of the only communities that does not require permitting for replacement windows and siding. Yet we have a large area that's in the Wildland Urban Interface, and we have a really strict energy code. By requiring permits, we get maybe once every 50 years the opportunity to ensure that buildings that are located in the Wildland Urban Interface actually use non-combustible siding as required by the Wildland Urban Interface Code. And of course, that windows that are compliant with the Wildland Urban Interface and citywide are required with our energy code requirements. Moving on to the next one. This is also in the base code, but traditionally was amended out in Boulder. So under the last code and codes before it, any deck in Boulder required a permit. And when we went through the racial equity instrument, we realized this was really having a detrimental impact on folks in our mobile home communities. Almost every single one of those mobile homes has a small deck out front of it, and almost none of them are permitted. So when they get complaints, often from the park management, code enforcement has no choice but to enforce on those complaints. And often there's really no easy way to permit those because they do not meet prescriptive construction standards. Thing is, there's really no life safety threat to having a 150, 200 square foot deck that's less than 30 inches above grade. So we're proposing just to exempt those from permitting and make it easier for folks to do that. Following on the next one, this also came about through our use of the racial equity instrument. We figured there was a disproportionate amount of enforcement in mobile home parks on these small storage sheds. So our existing code allows sheds up to 80 square feet. We're proposing to increase that to 120 square feet, which is the limitation in the International Building Code. The International Residential Code actually allows up to 200 square feet, but that's actually getting pretty large. So this seemed like a good compromise. We'd have a cheap, affordable storage structure without requiring them to put an engineered foundation or meet our really high wind and snow loads for something that's going to be used to store bicycles and lawnmowers. Moving on, the next one also came about as our use of the racial equity instrument. There's an exception in the International Residential Code under 107.1 that allows you to build a small addition without getting a soils test or having an engineered foundation design provided, as long as that addition is only 150 square feet. We're proposing to increase that to 200 square feet just to make it a little bit easier for folks to build additions on existing homes and, potentially improve their ability to utilize their home for their family members or age in place. So the next one is it's a change from something we already did. Originally, playground equipment that was installed on residential private property was exempt from permitting, but it wasn't exempt for HOAs or homeowners associations. So now we're proposing to increase that exemption to say that if you want to install a swing set or a slide or something like that on an HOA property or a residential private property, it'll be exempt from permitting as long as it's installed in conformance with Consumer Safety Commission guidelines. Finally, the last one here is a deletion of a local amendment requiring art fault breakers. So we had a local amendment in our adoption of the National Electric Code that required you to bring that panel completely up to current code if you were replacing the panel. This is problematic for a few reasons, but particularly in terms of socioeconomic equity and safety. In fact, as we have a lot of people in the city trying to upgrade electrical panels to accommodate things like EV charging and heat pumps, they're running into a really significant cost barrier with this local amendment that required them to install arc fault breakers. Now, arc fault breakers do improve safety. That's not debatable, but they're not required by the National Electric Code. And once again, Boulder is the only community across the Front Range that had this requirement. It was often adding as much as $2,500 to $3,000 per panel upgrade, which, as you can imagine, particularly for lower income folks, is a huge barrier. And it's not just a barrier to upgrading their electrical panel, it's a barrier to buying an EV, it's a barrier to electrification of their home. So we really thought it was time we deleted that amendment and just went back to the base code as required by state law. Okay, so moving on to the actual significant updates here, there was a couple little cleanups done in the mobile home park. I will admit there's probably still more space in that chapter for things to be cleaned up. One of the things that was deleted was there's a section on commercial use of mobile homes. Not sure where that came from. They're not suitable for commercial use. They don't meet accessibility requirements, floor load requirements. Since I've been at the city, I've never seen anyone try to use one, so we just deleted that code as being obsolete. And then the second thing was pretty significant, but we had a large chapter on foundations and blocking and tie downs. Well, since 2006, that's been regulated by the Division of Local Affairs through the state. So it was completely obsolete code, so we simply deleted it. So those are the only real changes we made in the mobile home park chapter. So moving on to the 2024 International Residential Code, I'm just going to try and go through these as quickly as possible. I apologize, they're very technical sometimes. I'll try and explain as I go. So there's some new protection requirements for storage batteries in garages. Those are things like Tesla Powerwalls. They're pretty simple. If you have a Tesla Powerwall or a similar battery in a place where it could get damaged, you have to put a bollard in front of it now. There's a new shared accessory option for accessory room option for two-family dwellings. So if you have a duplex, you can now have a shared space that both duplexes open onto. And there's a new provision called imaginary lot lines, which is added for calculating fire separation distance and considering multiple dwellings on a single lot. So how this would work is, under the old code, there was really no guidelines as to how you separated, say you had two homes on one lot, how far apart those had to be for fire separation. But if they're on separate lots, they had to be at least 5 feet from the property line if they weren't fire-rated walls. So this creates an imaginary lot line between two dwelling units on a single parcel, detached dwelling units, to be clear, not attached ones. So we actually have something to measure to and figure out that fire separation distance. This created a lot of concern with the public when we first announced, this is one of the code changes, but I want to be very clear, it doesn't apply to accessory buildings at all. So accessory dwelling units, garages, studios are totally exempt from this requirement. It would only apply if you had two single-family dwellings on one lot. It doesn't apply to duplexes, townhomes, anything like that. So really, it shouldn't be that impactful in the city of Boulder. Oops. Some other changes, air exhaust openings are now allowed near operable windows and doors. This next one is a big one. A2L refrigerants have been added as an option for cooling equipment. So as of January 1, 2025, the federal government actually started to phase out the previous generation of refrigerants and have mandated these new A2L refrigerants. What an A2L refrigerant is a low global warming potential but moderately flammable refrigerant. Those were prohibited in the previous code, so you couldn't, under our current code, you can't even install a mini split anymore if it uses these new refrigerants. So the code has been updated to address this change in federal law. Another really significant change here, habitable attics and basements in existing buildings can now have a ceiling height of 6 feet and 8 inches. For the last 100 years, this has been 7 feet, which has been a real barrier for folks trying to finish basements or build ADUs in existing homes that don't meet that threshold. There is really no flexibility. So this is really a significant change and should help improve housing affordability within the city. Okay, moving on to the International Building Code. There's a pretty significant change in Section 104 regarding the duties of the building official, specifically around alternative means and methods. So alternative means and methods, the code has always acknowledged that while it's prescriptive and it tries to cover everything, it's impossible to cover every possible design scenario that might come up. And traditionally, you've been able to apply to the building official and say, hey, I want to do this alternative, and I think this is why you should do it. And really, it was just up to the whim of the building official to make that decision. Now there's an actual checklist and a procedure for the building official to go through to make that decision, which really should help clarify that and make it more consistent. There's some new provisions regarding the wind resistance of aggregate surface roofs. In the 2018 code, those roofs are prohibited in areas with wind speeds over 120 miles an hour. Well, that was problematic for us because the entire city has wind speeds over 120 miles an hour. It's been really challenging when people come in to re-roof those. Thankfully, ICC recognized this was maybe gone a bit far and have gone back to allowing those right up to 165 miles an hour. There are requirements in terms of aggregate size and parapet walls. This is a really beneficial change because these roof systems perform really well in our climate zone. They have low embodied carbon and they're extremely fire resistant. So we're glad to see them being allowed again in our community. There's also a change in that it increases the allowable height of a group R2 occupancy, which is like a residential building, with an NFPA 13R system. So that might have a small benefit to some of our buildings in town, but probably not huge. There's now some occupiable space requirements now apply if a roof is usable for anything more than maintenance or repair. There's new regulations added for adult changing stations when they're required. And this next one's was a local amendment in our code and is now in base code. Carbon monoxide detection is now required in all occupancies where a CO producing device is present. And that detection notification can be addressed in several ways. So moving on to the International Existing Building Code. This is the code that regulates buildings that are already existing and are being modified. Same as the IBC, the occupiable roofs requirement has changed. There's some new smoke compartment requirements for Group I1 and Condition 2 occupancies, which are things like hospitals and ambulatory care facilities, where they now may need to be divided into no fewer than 2 smoke compartments for more substantial additions and alterations. And just like the IBC, the adult changing stations regulations have been updated. There's also a new section requiring owners to designate a site safety coordinator who's responsible for conducting daily fire inspections on jobs in existing buildings. Quite honestly, that'll probably just end up being the general contractor. Not a huge change, but it's a clarification. This next one is really a pretty big change and potentially really beneficial. So there's a new appendix added for temporary emergency uses. So this provides guidance to engineers, architects, and code officials to allow temporary emergency uses of existing buildings with respect to minimum code requirements. And it's really like a checklist or a template for us to go through when a building is being proposed for an emergency use. So that doesn't mean like a long-term emergency use, but let's say we had a flood or a fire and we needed to use a warehouse building as an emergency shelter. This allows us to go through that checklist and make sure that building meets a bare minimum standard without going through an entire code process or permitting process to do so. So it could be really beneficial in the long run. Okay, moving on to the International Plumbing Code. There's some new provisions added that's for supporting of buried piping beneath buildings where expansive soils conditions exist, which is probably quite impactful in Boulder. That's a lot of our community. There's a new requirement for tracer wire for buried plastic sewer piping, and there's now an option for vacuum testing of DWV, which is drain, waste, and vent piping. And this is really a pretty important one for us here in Colorado because currently you can do either an air test or a water test. The piping manufacturers don't recommend air testing, and filling a pipe with water in the middle of winter is a bad idea. So this is an alternative that doesn't violate manufacturers' guidelines and allows us to conduct a test still in cold conditions. There's also new flow requirements for shower heads, limiting them to 2 gallons per minute to improve the efficiency of water use. There's new installation standards for solvent cemented plastic piping joints, and there's new standards for chemical waste piping materials. Moving on to the International Mechanical Code. So under the previous versions of the code, you couldn't use ductless domestic range hoods in Group I1 and I2, which are institutional occupancies, things like hospitals, care facilities, things of that nature. Those prohibitions have now been removed and you can use them in those facilities. There's a new identification requirement to address the previously mentioned A2L refrigerants and B2L refrigerants. A B2L refrigerant is simply ammonia. Once again, it's a low global warming potential, low flammability refrigerant. And there's new requirements for machinery rooms containing these new refrigerants. There's an addition of a new minimum landing and a roof hatch for personnel to safely use the hatch when accessing the roof for maintenance or repair of mechanical equipment. And there's a new testing option for grease duct work. There's also a new standard for refrigeration systems containing carbon dioxide when used as a refrigerant. Okay, moving on to the International Property Maintenance Code. There's some new sections under Section 105 that clarify the types of experts required for owners and operators to employ for required testing and reports of compliance. The section on warrants has been clarified to clarify the use of warrant for legal entry of a property by code officials. And there's been an adjustment of administrative procedures and remedies, civil penalties and investigative fees to align with Title 10, Chapter 3 violations. And the section on unsafe structures and equipment has been changed to allow unsafe structure to be placarded as dangerous or hazardous. This allows for broader placarding for hazardous structures to be posted as unsafe. Okay, moving on to the 2024 International Fire Code updates. There's now an appendix, Appendix O, that allows valet trash. This is something we've heard about pretty extensively on the code front. What valet trash is, if you live in a multi-family building, it allows you to put out your trash and recycling cans in the hallway, just like you would in a single-family building out on the street. And someone from the HOA or the building management comes around and collects that. Traditionally, that wasn't allowed because it was considered, you had flammable receptacles and trash sitting in the hallway and it created an egress hazard. Boulder Fire is proposing to adopt Appendix O, which will allow valet trash where we can do it. So I think that's a huge benefit to the citizens of Boulder. There's two new sections added in Chapter 3 that address the storage of lithium-ion and lithium metal batteries, as well as powered micro-mobility devices. I want to be clear, this really is only a commercial requirement. This doesn't impact people storing these devices in their homes or apartments. But, if you had, say, a bakery and you were using e-bikes for a delivery service and you had 10 of them in a small space, then this provision would apply. There's also new requirements for fire sprinklers to specifically address the storage and manufacturing of lithium-ion and lithium batteries. I will note that the city already requires sprinklers in these areas with the adoption of past codes due to our amendments. So there's really no change to our current requirements, but it is an update in the 24 code. And the fire protection requirements for the storage of distilled spirits and wines was expanded for new storage facilities. So staff's analysis and recommendation, we really recommend that the City Council adopt Ordinance 8684 because the changes would help update Boulder's life safety codes to current international standards. It would help reduce construction costs and remove code barriers to socioeconomic and racial equity, and potentially improve Boulder's insurance risk rating. This is the proposed motion language, and that's the end of my presentation.
All right. Thanks, Rob. That was fascinating. Nuri, you were not wrong. Much more exciting than you might have expected.
Right?
All kinds of fascinating things. All right. Well, does council have any questions for city staff before we go to the public hearing? Lauren Folkerts.
Mayor, would you like us to take the slides down if we put the questions in the chat?
Yes, please.
I'll wait until after the public hearing. Sorry.
Okay, just questions for now. Tina?
Yeah, I just had a couple of quick questions. The first is about how many people attend the sessions, the two sessions you referred to at the beginning. I'm just curious about what the interest was, or not so much the interest, but who does show up.
The first one, there was about, I think about 8 or 9 people that showed up, and it was interesting. Every single one of them was either a builder or a design professional. Wasn't intended that way, but I guess they're the most affected by it. The second one, I think there were about 25 people there, which was quite a turnout. Not that many of them spoke. Mostly they listened, but there were a few people that had questions and concerns.
Okay, and then I have 2 small questions. The other is when we're reducing the ceiling height.
Yes.
For those areas where people might be living, there's still a window requirement, correct?
Yes, this doesn't change egress requirements. It's purely just the ceiling height. So if you're finishing a basement, you would still be required to install egress windows.
And it doesn't diminish the size of the window. That's
no.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, when we're talking about the invisible lot lines for the fire separation between structures, do we have any difference in the amount of separation if we're closer to the WUI area versus the non-WUI area?
No.
Okay. Thank you. That's it. That was great.
All right. And just remember that at the beginning of our deliberations, there will be a quiz on the specific items in his presentation. So I hope you took good notes. All right. We have 2 people signed up for the public hearing. Each of them will get 3 minutes to speak, and they are Lynn Siegel and Michelle Rodriguez.
First of all, free Palestine, because all of this matters not if we are all eliminated by Israel in World War III. Seriously, it's going to happen soon. Free Palestine. Second, 10 years ago, I had an energy retrofit with Energy Smart, with the county, and in the process of interviewing a contractor, Stellar, I connected back with the county, and they said, oh, Stellar's been dropped from our list of vendors, and wouldn't tell me why. And so I called Stellar, and Stellar said, well, we were assigned to do a solar install under adverse conditions, and the county required us to do it in the adverse conditions in spite of violating our warranty and subjecting us to liability and potential damages. And when we refused to do the solar install, the county forced us and said, if you aren't doing it, you're done, and dumped him. And I spent hours talking to that person first, to that contractor. They were really good because they did all different things. So now comes 10 years later, I'm getting an energy retrofit, and the city says, I'm sorry, you can't have anything to do with your energy retrofit. We're giving it to you free. This other one I had to pay myself. And that's great. It's free now, but I can't be involved. So they did a retrofit that was a complete disaster. Everything they did to my place was completely botched. It'll cost me thousands and thousands of dollars to reverse what CARE did for me. So one of the things I talked to Rob about, because it was a hot water heater between my refrigerator in the kitchen and the living room, and they put a door into my living room to access the hot water heater. Now, when I bought my house in 2000, I never had to have any permit or any requirement. To my understanding, this was a mechanical job, not a remodeling job that would not require such a permit unless the contractor themselves requested one. But I wasn't consulted, was I? And this contractor wanted to have a permit done for the hot water heater. So I have a loud electronic buzz that's not remediatable because the hot water heater needs air circulation around it. Shame on you.
Your time is up. Thank you for your testimony. Our final speaker is Michelle Rodriguez.
Hi guys, my apologies. I accidentally signed up for the public speaking. I bet you guys were surprised because I don't usually speak at the public hearings. Also, I noticed that the meeting's not being live streamed right now. Is that a technical issue or is that meant to be? Or, but anyway, you can carry on with your meeting. I appreciate all your work. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Can I just ask technical staff, do we have a live stream going?
I'll look into it, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Please let us know. Right. So now we can come back to council for a deliberation on the topic. Who would like to get us started? There's Lauren's hand.
Everyone knew I would want to speak on this one, so you're just waiting for it, I can tell. Rob, I really did appreciate your presentation. It was much better than reading it in the packet. You made it very exciting, so thank you. I appreciate that staff brought forward those permit exemptions for freestanding decks and larger sheds and the removal of arc fault connectors. As part of something else, I would love to see decks not considered as part of the structure, because right now, if you add a deck to your house, it can make it so that you're not meeting your height requirement for your house, which is a pretty strange code loophole that we have put ourselves in. But that's not related to tonight, just because you brought up decks. I'm still not a fan of requiring permitting for siding and window replacements, but I understand why we're going forward with that. I still feel like the people who are going to comply are the people who are going to comply with the requirements for the WUI and for our energy code requirements. And you will likely still have a number of people doing siding and window replacement projects from windows they buy from Home Depot and things like that, and they are not going to apply for permits, and they might do them in a day and we probably won't catch them. So I think that it does just create additional work for people who are likely to be following the rules anyway. And then my hotline. So I love all this work that you brought forward. As part of this, I noticed that there was a portion that was talking about how we measure floor area. And after some discussion back and forth with staff, I'm hoping that we could, as part of a different project, but maybe with direction tonight, look at changing the way we measure sizes of buildings and switch to measuring them based on the interior air barrier. Because as I mentioned in the hotline, the way our energy code and building codes and zoning codes and property values interact makes it so that there's this really strong incentive to create really narrow, high energy efficiency walls, which means we're using a lot of foam plastics and things with really high embodied carbon in order to insulate buildings. And if we change the way we measure it, then that would allow people to have thicker walls without taking kind of a hit in terms of what they're allowed to build on their property. Those thicker walls can be insulated with more carbon neutral or carbon sequestering insulations. And I also got a number of comments from community members about my hotline to remind me that not only are they better in terms of carbon, but they're also often better in terms of fire performance. So a lot of foam plastic insulations in a fire not only create a lot of toxic chemicals, but they melt and it's very problematic. Anyway, so I'm hoping that we could make this change to align with our climate goals and reduce embodied carbon while maintaining our high energy efficiency standards. And while this might allow moderately larger buildings, I think that trade-off for the significant impact on potential emissions reductions would make sense and align with our values. And since I'll let staff talk to this more, but I believe is working on several projects that this could be incorporated into, and it's not a big lift, I would like to ask that staff bring this change forward in a cohesive manner as part of an upcoming modification. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Lauren. And just, I think you may have meant not to put words in your mouth, a modest increase in building size, not a moderate one, because I think it's just a handful of square feet.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. I mean, sort of the thickness of the wall.
Yeah, that's about it. Brad, did you want to address Lauren's proposal there?
Yeah, Brad Mueller, Director of Planning and Development Services. On that last point, very much appreciate the observation and insights about the relationship between the wall width and embodied carbon, and what we do recognize as staff after conversation with you really creates kind of an unintended disincentive to use those better types of insulation. We don't think that'll be a huge lift, and can incorporate that in some of the other items we're doing. So we'd be happy to commit to that if that's council's will, and bring that forward yet this year. Comprehensively, as you mentioned, because it does kind of interplay between building and impact fees and the zoning code and a couple other things.
Very good. So procedurally, would that be a nod of 5 to see if that were council's direction as part of this hearing?
I believe so, but I'll get that confirmed by Roberto or somebody else.
This would be the nod of 5.
Great. Well, let's get through our other comments and then we can come back to that proposal. So we got Mark and Tina.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of Lauren's idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. The one concern I have is I would hate to see developers get larger buildings and still build thin walls. Is there anything we can do to, in effect, provide the larger floor area to those who are doing sort of ecologically sound structures, as opposed to giving it to everyone and having some guy, just build another cheap building with thin walls and using toxic, materials. Brad, I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, Councilman Wallach. That certainly would be the intent, and that's a little bit of the complexity of figuring out how to make sure people don't create it as a loophole for getting additional space. So that would be key towards our efforts.
Okay, good.
Can I comment on that one real quick?
Yeah, please, Rob.
So the way that it would be measured would be from when Lauren said internal air barrier, basically what she's talking about is drywall to drywall measurement. So the only way you would benefit from it is if the wall was thicker. If you built a thinner wall, you'd still be within the same as the current standard. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Other than that, I'm very much in favor. Thank you.
Tina?
Yeah, I had a similar question about whether we could provide that measurement option only if you committed on the front end to using those materials. And then generally, one of the things I like about our building code is the points system that we have, where you have a lot of different ways of getting points to meet our goals. And I wonder if over time, and certainly not tonight, we might consider looking at points for more of the building materials and construction methods that has flexibility to reflect how quickly these different materials are evolving, and then create some kinds of incentives so that people who are building will be more open to using them, and going more to a menu style to see if we can get that to happen.
Rob, I'll defer to Rob on that.
Well, yeah, I'm not entirely sure I understand, because the way this particular code works is it's kind of the way I always describe it. Sounds bad, but it's like a D-, right? This is the bare minimum standard you can get in order to have us give you a certificate of occupancy for a building. It's not really like the energy code where we have that point system where you're describing. It's like, we want you to do this, plus we want you to get to a certain goal. We're just trying to say this is the absolute minimum that's allowable. So I'm not quite sure how a point system could play out, but I'm open to hearing more about it.
That's fine. It was just something I was thinking about. So thank you.
Great, and
Can I colloquy on that real quick?
go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that, you know, some of that material aspect is in our energy code in the new embodied carbon checklist. But there are different pathways, so it doesn't always apply to every project.
Very good. Taisha? Taisha, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was saying thank you for these updates, and I learned a ton, and it was very informative, both the materials and the presentation. I especially appreciated the use of the racial equity tool and explicit examples of how policy changes were made and resource allocations were made. That's exactly what that tool is for. I would recommend some better marketing on just the outcomes and the things that are happening, because I feel like I hear a lot of, or rather, I don't hear from the community a lot of the things, or rather they know about a lot of the things and changes that we're making. And so hopefully they'll see it in their energy bills, but if there's other ways that we can continue to lift that up. And just in general, I think, you know, that's an area where I would love to get more information on just the cost around some of these and the affordability issues around them. And of course, you know, we know the you know, community conversations are ongoing right now around energy and Excel, et cetera. So that's just an area that I felt like in all of this, I felt like there's this other thing that's happening, and we're kind of spending a lot of time on this, which is really important, but I feel like there's this other thing, and I know we have time set aside for that, but just recognizing that there's this kind of other elephant in the room, and how we can, you know, aligning some of that work, and as I said, particularly around affordability. But just in general, was really grateful for the direction of where we're going, and just the changes that even the renter considerations were also very much appreciated as the renter on our council right now. And so just again, really thinking of all the different stakeholder groups and how they'll be impacted is very much appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just call on myself and just add to the thanks for all the work. Clearly, this was a lot of work and a lot of very detailed work, and we're fortunate to have such knowledgeable professionals such as yourself, Rob, to manage us through the process. And then echo Taisha's comments about appreciating the use of the racial equity instrument. I sometimes get questions from like people in other jurisdictions to say, okay, well, you've got this tool, how does it actually end up making a difference? And so this is a great couple of examples to add to the list of here are concrete specific changes that we made to our policies based on looking at the racial equity instrument. So really appreciate that, turning that into action, not just having it sit on the shelf as a plan. I don't see any other hands raised, so I wonder maybe we might consider a motion on the main item in front of us, and then maybe look to see if Lauren has a nod of 5 for that next phase. So if anyone were interested in the motion, that would be a great time. Lauren.
I move that we pass ordinance 8684, amending Title 10 Structures, BRC 1981, and adopting by reference the 2024 international codes regarding property maintenance, building, electrical, fire, mechanical, fuel, gas, and plumbing, and setting forth related details.
Okay.
Yeah, a motion in a second. Can we do a roll call, please, Alicia?
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll start the roll call tonight for the adoption of Ordinance 8684 with Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Yes.
Councilmember Marquis.
Yes.
Shuhart.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Yes.
Weiner.
Yes.
Adams.
Taisha, I don't think we heard you there.
I was saying yes. I have allergies. I don't know what's going on.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yes.
Benjamin.
Yes.
And Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Ordinance 8684 is hereby adopted unanimously.
Roberto, did you have a thought?
Alicia, did you follow along The suggested motion language, this is Roberto Ramirez, Deputy City Attorney. Alicia, did you follow along with the suggested motion language that you put in with the one that was actually read?
Yes, because the actual, she motioned to adopt ordinance 8684. Oh, my apologies. You're right. Amend and pass. Thank you, Roberto. That's great for catching that. Thank you. So
actually, I wish I could take credit for that. Our attorney, Christy Fitch, caught it.
thank you, Christy. I so appreciate you. So to correct the record, ordinance 8684 is hereby amended and passed as noted. Thank you, sir.
Very good. And then, Lauren, you're going to ask for a nod of 5. Do you want to give a brief restatement of what that request is for?
Yeah. So I would like to request a nod of 5 for staff to do a comprehensive look at changing how we measure building size, with looking to switch it towards measuring to the interior air barrier, as part of an upcoming code modification.
Very good. Nicole, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just had a quick clarification, because I think what I heard Brad say earlier was that this can be fit into existing work. It doesn't sort of need additional work. I just wanted to clarify that because we often use the nod of 5 for asking staff to like make a trade-off or do additional work or things like that. So I just want to triple check for the record that Brad said this isn't anything that's going to take a lot more work and it can be fit into what is already coming, which I'm fully supportive. I think it's a great idea, Lauren. Thank you for bringing it up.
Brad, did you want to speak to that?
No, I can just confirm that's true. This is something we'll fold in. Well, 2 things. 1, we have the capacity to do it as we envision it. And number 2, we think there's a couple very natural fits for some other items that we'll be bringing forward in terms of the actual bringing forward an ordinance.
Very good. As our facilitator Heather would say, we will just tuck this one into the existing item that you're working on. Mary loves the tuck-ins.
I have so much to say that I'm going to keep to myself right now.
Okay, so we've got a request for a nod of 5 to do as Lauren requested. Just raise your hand if you would like to see that happen. All right, I think I got 9 there. Okay, very good. Lauren, I really appreciate that proposal. I think it's very, very promising. So thanks for the creativity and bringing that one forth.
And thank you, staff, for working with me through some of the ups and downs of the figuring out what made the most sense. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks again to staff for amazing work on this project, and look forward to the changes it'll bring for our community. And now we can go to our final public hearing, which is a continued public hearing. Alicia, if you can read that into the record, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm paying attention this time because I was multitasking. All right. Item 5B tonight is the continued public hearing and consideration of the following items as part of the implementation of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. Our first item is the consideration of a motion to amend the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, including the 55th and Arapahoe Station Area Plan, to align the East Boulder Connections Plan with the refined vision for East Boulder area of change and to include additional supporting information. Our second item is the second reading and consideration of a motion to amend as recommended by staff in the staff memorandum, Ordinance 8669, amending Title IX Land Use Code, BRC 1981, by adopting form-based code standards for parts of East Boulder, moving from the form-based code from Appendix M to Chapter 9-14 Form-Based Code, BRC 1981, revisiting rezoning and trip reduction standards for East Boulder, and setting forth related details.
So much. Council, today we're coming back for continued discussion of the adoption of form-based code standards for parts of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, We know there's been a lot of conversation about this in the past and ongoing with community, and you're going to hear from that from staff in a bit. But I wanted to lift up tonight that staff's really going to be focusing on changes made to be as flexible as possible under the already adopted East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. And I'll note that they've tried hard to be mindful of making sure that changes don't alter the existing plan so much that it would actually require us to go back and amend the subcommunity plan itself. So with that, I will send it back to Brad Mueller, who's already been with us today. Brad?
Yes, thank you, Nuria. And I just want to add, before Christopher and Kathleen give the presentation, that we appreciated the opportunity with the continuance to re-engage with the stakeholders and really do a bit of a deeper dive even than all the engagement and outreach that had been done, not only for the form-based code, but years prior as part of the subcommunity plan as well. That did allow for some refinement and some clarification on things that will help us administer this in the future. And I think we've struck a good balance in making adjustments, but of course are happy to be able to present that to you this evening. And with that, I think I'm turning it to Kathleen initially.
Yes, good evening, Council. I am Kathleen King, Principal Planner on the Comprehensive Planning team. I will be presenting tonight with Comprehensive Planning Manager Christopher Johnson. And we also have Leslie Oberholzer from Codametrics, who's our project consultant online, and the city's Principal Urban Designer, Kalani Pahoa, available for questions later this evening. But thanks for this opportunity to present some additional revisions to the city's form-based code that the project team has made with community members and in response to additional community and council feedback received at our last session together on December 5th. And KJ's sharing a screen. Yep, great. So tonight we have a brief presentation to review those revisions. There's time to go over any remaining questions from council members. And then council will consider 2 motions this evening. Can go to the next slide. The first is related to amendments to the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. And the second is to adopt updates to the city's code. So subcommunity plan amendments are pretty limited. We're revising the connections plan based on feedback received during this process and adding 2 elements to support future implementation of the plan. We reviewed these amendments in December, so we'll not be re-presenting those tonight. But the code amendments, which really were the heart of this East Boulder project, we've made updates to the form-based code similarly to implement the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. We reviewed the bulk of those code updates in December and received council direction to hold some additional meetings with community members and consider some additional revisions as part of this code update project. So KJ will talk through those in a few minutes. But if you could go to the next slide. These are the key questions that we're asking of council this evening. Head to the next slide, please. And then just briefly to remind anyone watching, this project is focused on implementing East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. The plan was adopted in 2022. East Boulder is one of 10 subcommunities. The area is generally north of Arapahoe and east of Foothills. Next slide, please. And these proposed code updates would also include an update to the Appendix L map, which identifies where in the city form-based code applies. So form-based code currently applies to Boulder Junction and the Alpine Balsam site. And this update would add the 4 areas of change identified in the subcommunity plan to this Appendix L map. Next slide, please. So in response to council's direction in December, the project team held 2 additional open work sessions with community members in January. We had great groups participate at both sessions. Folks included multiple area property owners, some local and national developers, local architects, representatives from the project's technical advisory committee, and a couple of other interested community members. During these work sessions, we reviewed all of the comments and recommendations for revision received from community and council members, along with a staff analysis and recommendation. And I think we were able to identify some additional revisions that create greater flexibility within the code, but still align with recommendations of the subcommunity plan. So following those sessions, we were able to make those revisions. We shared the revised code back with interested stakeholders. Since then, we've received both letters of support and letters describing some remaining concerns about components of the code, and those letters were included in your packet. And now I think to go through those revisions, I will pass it over to KJ and he will walk you through those. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. My name is Christopher Johnson, Comprehensive Planning Manager with PNDS. As Kathleen mentioned, I'm going to walk through the most substantive changes that staff are recommending coming out of this additional outreach over the last couple of months. So I wanted to really quickly begin with a brief recap of the public hearing on December 5th last year. So, the council questions and discussion really primarily focused on clarifying and understanding when the form-based code would apply and the design standards that are in the code that are related to residential uses and production business space. Specifically, there was a lot of conversation around questions and then potential for future non-residential projects along Arapahoe in particular. As Kathleen mentioned, you asked staff to continue to have some discussions with property owners and stakeholders to explore greater flexibility and optionality when applying the form-based code, considering some alternative compliance for the production business space, and then also taking a closer look at several existing design standards to essentially reduce some of the prescriptiveness of them and allow for greater creativity in design and flexibility. So your memo packet includes a long table that lists all of the comments that we received back in December, and then a couple that came in through those additional stakeholder meetings. Also included in the table is a staff analysis of each of those comments and a recommendation on whether to accommodate a change in the ordinance or to not recommend a change. Tonight, we're going to focus on the most substantive revisions that are recommended by staff, and those include changes that would allow for all properties to opt out of the form-based code and use site review instead, removing an existing requirement that requires site review projects also be compatible with form-based code standards, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, including a new option for the provision of production business space and where that can be located on site, and then also a number of broad revisions to many of those design standards, really looking to improve and increase clarity of the code as well. So as a reminder for everybody, the form-based code is really only triggered and only applies if a property is proposing a really substantive or substantial change to the existing structure. So if that proposal is less than the thresholds that are defined by the code, then the default process is simply a by right permit under existing zoning or potentially through the site review process. Form-based code does not apply to those projects at all. Under the new proposed language, projects that are large enough to trigger the form-based code would also have this ability to now opt out and use the site review process instead. So to go into a little bit more detail around that, I wanted to make sure to clarify again the thresholds for when the form-based code applies. That's on the right side of the screen. So that includes any major additions that expand existing floor area by more than 60%. If you're less than 60%, form-based code does not apply. Any major facade modifications where 60% of that facade is being replaced. And I want to just be sure to clarify that only applies to facades that are within the frontage setback, which is that area between the street and the face of the building. So if you are replacing a facade that was on the rear or the side of a building, form-based code would not apply. That 60% threshold would not apply. Also, if you're creating a new facade associated with an addition or an expansion, and again, that only applies if that facade is within the frontage setback. And then finally, any replacement of more than 60% of the roof structure. So again, if you're below any of those thresholds, form-based code is not even on the table. But if you're more than that, if you are greater than that, or looking at a full redevelopment of a property, then the form-based code does apply. But the proposed revision to the ordinance by staff explicitly allows that all properties have the opportunity to opt out and instead use the site review process, provided that they meet the eligibility criteria that are listed in section 9214. So as an example, sites in the IG, or the Industrial General Zone District, must be 1 acre in size for site review. And we double check that all of the properties in the Flatirons Business Park are larger than 1 acre. So they would all therefore be able to use site review as an alternative to the form-based code if they choose. The next important revision, and really related to this, is to remove the standard that states that site review projects that are within form-based code areas are still required to be compatible with the intent and the standards of the form-based code. So staff is recommending that we delete this provision to ensure that these two processes are entirely separate and distinct from one another. So really to clarify that any form-based code standards would not apply to a project going through the site review process. Related to production business space, so staff are recommending that we introduce language that allows for greater flexibility on how and where to provide that production business space. And that only applies, again, to projects that are greater than 15,000 square feet. If it's less than that, the production business space requirement does not kick in. So we are proposing to allow that production business space be incorporated into the main building, or could be included in a separate structure on site. And really, this is intended to address some of the concerns and the comments we received about single tenant buildings and the issues of security or incompatible uses within those structures. I do want to note that staff feel really strongly that maintaining the production business space standard is really important and directly reflects input that we've received throughout this process from community members and planning board and from council yourselves, that the loss of light industrial space in the city as these areas are redeveloping is really of great concern. And so really the standard is intended to ensure that some of that space is replaced and included in new developments. And really, we want to continue to support our local entrepreneurs and makers and service industrial businesses through that. There has been conversation around a alternative compliance method to use some kind of a fee in lieu program or an equivalent. We're certainly open to that idea, and we'll continue to explore that as part of future implementation steps, but it's just outside the scope of this project. And we don't have the overall sort of structure to be able to implement something like that at this time. Finally, I just wanted to highlight and note that there are several amendments also included in the ordinance before you this evening that amend and make changes to a number of different standards to really provide more design flexibility, and particularly related to standards around the paseo design, stormwater elements, some of the building materials that are allowed on different facades, and then also clarifying the standards around mechanical equipment and making sure that it's clear that mechanical equipment can be located outside the building, particularly if it's going to cause any kind of a health and safety risk to the occupants of the building. There's also just some additional amendments to try to clarify standards and improve the usability so that future applicants, designers, and staff have the best code in front of them and are able to understand and interpret that as best as they can. So just to recap, the items for your consideration tonight include both the subcommunity plan amendments that were approved by planning board back in October. And just as a reminder, those were approved without changes to the land use or place type. So the existing land use and place types that are in the subcommunity plan would remain the same. And then also the suggested code amendments for the form-based code, and planning board did recommend approval for those code amendments as well. And I have some recommended motion language that I won't take the time to read through at this point, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, thanks so much, KJ, for that informative but concise presentation. do we have any questions for city staff? And just our format here, we did have a public hearing on this on December 5th. We're not taking additional public testimony. So let's start with clarifying questions, and then we can move into discussion of consideration of those motions. All right, questions. We got Mark and then Matt.
At our last meeting in December, I think the members of council were very, very clear that they wanted as much flexibility as possible for businesses, whether they're using the form-based code or opting for site review. And I think staff has done a very good job in providing more flexibility. But I have to ask, what is the purpose of section 9.9216? It goes on, I2, A1, and 2, which says that, as I read it, an exception can be granted to somebody using a site review if it is consistent with the goals and intents of the adopted area plan applied to the area. And I am asking you, do you really believe that to be consistent with the way capital is marshaled and deployed today, that somebody would commit to spend tens of millions of dollars on an approval process and then have to sit in the planning department's office and ask somebody, do you think that I'm meeting the goals and intents of the area plan? Businesses require a little more certainty than that. And I'm asking you why you would not correct that as you corrected so many other things. And by the way, before you suggest that I'm crazy, the Boulder Chamber has identified the very same issue as a problem and asked you to address that. And the solution seems to be pretty simple, but there is no such solution. So I'm asking, why are we in this position when we could fix it so easily?
Do you have the code reference available?
I mean, unless
I'd like to just be able to review the language.
Page 17 of the staff memo.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
KJ, I could try to respond.
A1, A2.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Hella, for chiming in.
If I've got the wrong citation, please correct me.
Yeah.
And I guess my first question is, am I correct that under the current standards or the proposed standards, that a developer would, at the end of the day, as he tries to obtain approvals for his property, has to sit in front of planning and be told whether or not his project at that point meets the goals of the East Boulder sub-community plan?
Councilman Wallach, I'm happy to give some initial thoughts about that while Christopher and Kathleen look up the section, and I see we have Hella Panawig as well, who represents a lot of the land use items for the city. In kind of broad terms, I appreciate the question and the inquiry around that. I would say in broad terms, the consistency with any plan, whether we're talking about this sub-community plan or the comprehensive plan or a different sub-community plan, is very typical and kind of integral to the land use process and the way that land use decision-making has been set up for jurisdictions and ultimately for council review. It's not so much a staff determination, but that ultimately gets to the heart of planning board and council's determination about whether projects are consistent. There certainly are existing property rights, like the use that is allowed under zoning, that do not get superseded by a plan, which is aspirational and speaks to the intent But there is still that important quasi-judicial function that boards and councils maintain to make sure that the administration of zoning codes are meeting the intent of broader visions. Maybe I'll stop there and have Hella kind of maybe speak to more of the technical aspects of it, but that's kind of the philosophical nature of it.
Yeah, I rephrase the question. If the zoning permits a research facility, let's say in Flatiron Park, where we are trying to develop an ecosystem of research facilities, if the zoning permits that, okay, and it is developed as such, forgetting where the citation is, does planning have the right under any circumstances to say that does not meet the standard of consistency with the East Boulder plan? Do you have the legal right to say to that developer, thank you, but that's not what we were looking for?
Yeah, the zoning allowed by that zone district would definitely allow the allowed uses. There's probably a more technical and nuanced answer, so I'll kind of yield to Hella at this point.
Yeah, it seems like the question has changed a little bit. If I may respond to the question that was first asked and that particular section that you were referring to, Councilmember Wallach, that is a section that only applies if a developer comes in with a form-based code project and proposes not to comply with one or several of the standards within the form-based code. So this is a way to still approve the project, even though not all form-based code standards are met, if the developer can show that the goals and intents of the area plan are still met.
Then I apologize, and but I reiterate my second question. Is there a right on the part of the planning department to turn down a project that is permitted by the zoning on the basis of it not being consistent with the East Boulder sub-community plan? And that's an either or. I mean, either you can or you can't.
And I think what you are probably referring to are the site review standards that require consistency with sub-community plans and the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. And I think I wouldn't say there is a right to turn down a project based on a sub-community plan or a Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. Can uses be ever considered based on the plan? I think that depends on the circumstances of what's proposed and the particular language that's being applied. When in development review processes, the criteria have to be specific enough to give a developer sufficient notice of what might be required of the developer. And then the decision makers also have to apply the criteria rationally and consistently. So with these plans, they're pretty broadly drafted for many different planning purposes and not like laws. So when a reviewing body considers the plan and it considers uses, then I would caution the decision maker to keep in mind when reviewing the application whether or not a reasonable landowner would understand what might be required from the decision maker, what they want to do. And I think there are circumstances when that can be considered, but oftentimes the plans are not specific enough.
I think I'm asking a fairly direct question, and it's the same question that the Boulder Chamber is asking for resolution of, but I'm really not getting a very direct answer, and
okay, let me try to respond differently.
Yeah.
Do I think that there is ever a circumstance where a use could be considered and result in the denial of an application? I think there could be circumstances like that, but it is rare.
Okay.
And I'll elaborate a little bit, Councilman, that this gets, again, to the heart of the quasi-judicial decision-making. Just to clarify, staff would never be in a position. We're always going to give a conservative read of interpretation, but the quasi-judicial decision on individual projects asks for a balance of considerations. And while a plan might, for example, say that there should be paths and connections, you know, that may become the most relevant thing in a specific site plan, but certainly not to the extent that a proposed exercise of a property right to build a use means that the entire site should be a trail, for example. So it is a bit of a nuanced answer, but certainly the right exists for a property to exercise their zoning. And that would always be defended by staff and counseled by the city attorney's office to the decision makers.
Okay. I mean, do you get why this would be problematic to people who are raising substantial amounts of capital to develop within our city high-end research facilities?
So, Mark, I wonder if I might pop in here because we are going on this line of inquiry for a bit. So just to the point of that, I'll just pop in as a former member of planning board that, you know, we have the comprehensive plan, we have area plans, they do influence decision making, but they're not like regulatory documents. So yes, you refer to area plans and the comp plan as part of your consideration when you're looking at a project. But I mean, I'll just say that that is how planning has worked in this town for a very long time.
Okay, then I have an issue with how planning has worked in this town for a very long time.
And the way saying it's always been that way is never the only, like, the end of a discussion, but just to say it's part of our planning tradition here in Boulder anyway. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
All right, Matt?
Thanks, Aaron. And I appreciate Mark's inquiry, and I know where Mark is headed with this, and I might be able to come at this from a slightly different angle, but have a couple of questions. In particular, the production business space, I'm a little curious as to how that is that a requirement in site review?
No, it's not.
Okay. So then how would a developer be sort of judged on that? Because there was a mention that there seemed to be a question about whether or not a cash in lieu would be a part of it. That makes me think that there's some sort of mandate to that if you're requiring, if we would consider a cash in lieu to opt out of such requirement. So I'm just sort of curious, where does that fit in?
Yeah, so the production business space is only a standard that's part of the form-based code. So if, again, the form-based code allows for a greater level of intensity than is allowed under existing zoning or through site review, it automatically grants full 55-foot height limit. So there's no height modification required. So there's a number of things that are incentivized by the form-based code. Which is partly why we include then some more detailed standards around the design of the building, the types of uses at the ground floor, you know, those kinds of things as a balance to the allowed increase in intensity. It also, you know, provides for a more administrative review process. So we need some more tangible, quantitative, do you meet the standard or do you not meet the standard kinds of tools in the toolbox. So the production business space is really a translation of the community input and the policies of the sub-community plan to say, we want to make sure that there is a place for small and local businesses and entrepreneurs and makers in East Boulder in the future. So the form-based code has a, you know, definitive standard around that. Through a site review process, there wouldn't necessarily be the same expectation that you would provide that same kind of space, but there would at least be some conversation around, you know, is there an opportunity to continue to provide those types of light industrial spaces in the future? Again, it wouldn't be it's just one policy, one aspect of the sub-community plan. So not every single project under site review to be consistent with the sub-community plan would have to provide that space. Not all policies are going to be executed or provided by every individual project. So there would be a lot more discretion and flexibility around consistency with the plan related to that standard going forward. And if cash in lieu were ever to be, created as an option, again, that would only apply to the standard as it's applied through form-based code review. It would not necessarily be applied to a site review project.
Okay, and so to be clear, the opt-in, so the optional site review process that's being created here, that site review criteria is based on what general standard? And maybe in particular for the Flatirons Business Park, is it based on the legislative intent of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan or a much broader city criteria?
The site review process is governed by the site review criteria in section 9.2.14, I believe, and that is consistent across the entire city. So if you are within a site review process, those criteria apply regardless of where you are. And part of one of the changes that we're making to remove that compatibility with form-based code, the importance of that is that it maintains then sort of the distinction of the site review process as an individual process that applies citywide, regardless of where you are. The criteria within site review, and I won't be able to list them all, but I could probably pull it up.
Oh, sure.
One of the most, and gets back to Councilmember Wallach's comments, one of the criteria is in site review is that you are consistent with the comprehensive plan and any adopted subcommunity or area plans. That's a basic premise of the quasi-judicial process, to make sure that, particularly in a discretionary process like site review, that there is consistency with the overall intent and goals of the plan.
So that last part is the part I guess I'm just wanted to be curious about, and I may address that later in comments, which is, might it be that some of the tension we're facing in particular, and I'll be clear, I love this form-based code. I love what has been done for like 95% of everything. It just seems like it's this Flatirons Business Park that's creating this tension for trying to reconcile some challenges. Might, under the current East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, might it be that the intent to make this research center, this nexus, this regional, if not national quantum hub, might be incompatible with our current writing of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, and hence there's a foundational tension there?
I think it depends on your perspective. If you asked me and staff, I actually don't think that there is a conflict there, because for a couple of different reasons. 2/3 of the business park is identified as destination workplace within the subcommunity plan. So that allows for both residential and non-residential uses entirely, right? So there's no question, at least in our understanding of the subcommunity plan and the intent of that, or through the form-based code that would apply to that area, that the workshop building and a fully non-residential project, research and development facility, whatever it needs to be, is possible there. And then even the section that is directly along 55th, we believe there's still a lot of flexibility for those R&D types of uses along that area, either through site review or through form-based code. Because again, the 50% residential floor area doesn't kick in until a project is more than 35,000 square feet. The residential can be built in a separate structure if it were, and again, this is all under form-based code, and you make the choice to use that. If you go through site review, then we again, based on the reading of the subcommunity plan, we believe that there is flexibility for research and development facilities within that area as well. So from our perspective, we don't think there's that much of a conflict. If if council feels otherwise and would like us to re-examine the subcommunity plan at some point in the future, that's something we could do. But from a workload capacity standpoint, it would have to wait until after the comprehensive plan.
And if I can just add, Councilman Benjamin, I would actually characterize any tension that exists, and I think, reasonable people could characterize it differently. But if I were to characterize, it's really about the timing and pace of transition of cities. Not to get too philosophical, but the balance that the city and councils in previous discussions is seeking is moving an area that's got suburban development to one that is more dense and is more of a mixed use, but creating the possibility of that. And with the optionality, you know, that timing could be 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years for existing uses and proposed ones. But not creating a platform for that transition means that it will never happen, I would submit. And so that's probably the tension as I would characterize it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate those responses, and thanks for fielding my questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. I had a couple questions, but they have already been answered. So thanks for those answers. So I'll end our question asking period and then go into comments. Who would like to kick off our comments as we move towards consideration of these motions? Or I guess, you know, what I might frame it is to say, do people feel like they want to make any changes, or perhaps does anyone want to put a motion on what we've got now? If you can kind of steer your comments about whether any changes should be considered. Matt.
I'll just, since I was on a roll, I might as well keep going. So for one, as I prefaced earlier, I really like where this is going, and I don't want to hold up the form-based code, because there are folks who want to move on making some changes based on our East Boulder sub-community plan, which is the intent, was to allow this area to be under a phase of adaptation. And so I don't want to hold that up anymore. So I do like the work, and I appreciate the efforts that have gone in to create the optionality and the flexibility. I will say that I think that there might be some misinterpretation either in community or by folks that, you know, that are involved in these processes that think that East Boulder Sub-Community Plan is a housing mandate. It is not. It is purely optionality, and that the use that you currently have is use you can keep. And if you want to evolve now or in the future, you have that option to do so. But I want to make sure that it's very clear that we're not mandating housing. In fact, we're not mandating anything. The whole purpose is the flexibility. And so I appreciate staff for that. But I think it just needs to be said in public that that is the intent of this deliberative council body, is to maintain that optionality going forward. I will say, with regards to the Flatirons Business Park, I like that we're going in optionality. I just like us to keep a really close eye on this, because this quantum hub that we are establishing has the potential to be the next generation's IBM that came to town, Celestial Seasonings, even the university, and Ball Aerospace, to name a few. And I want to make sure that we are creating as great of an opportunity for that hub to create good paying jobs in our community. And so let's just keep an eye on how our rules are, maybe if they're inhibiting or not, or if there's tension that goes there. And hopefully, if we keep an eye on, you can bring that to us quickly so we can reconcile any of those conflicts that do arise, because this is a once in a lifetime generational thing to get a hub like this in our community. And I'd like to see us make this transition as fast as possible to make that happen. So thank you, staff, for all the great work on this. I appreciate it.
Very good. Taisha.
Thank you so much. I agree with my colleagues. I continue to appreciate the learning curve on this. I also appreciated the opportunity to visit that Flatirons research area. And so I want to thank those who took the time to walk me around and share about the incredible work they're doing. Even in, you know, as they're building these buildings, they're thinking about not only the energy, but they're also thinking about food for their staff and their employees. And I just was really, really impressed. At the same time, I was also very happy to see this mandatory housing component, because we need to do things differently. And to Council Benjamin's point, you know, I look to IBM, I look to the tech center, I look to, and I also am seeing all this housing that they're now putting around those places, because they thought of that business first, that actually incentivizes single-use cars and vehicles, and disincentivizes 15-minute walkable neighborhoods. So I think we need to be as consistent as possible in the application of the directions that we've been talking about. And so I'm actually very excited about this, and really eager, because when I talk to the folks in these businesses and really stellar forward-thinking people, these are exactly the kind of people that we're going to need to to innovate so that we have housing close to where people are working, where we have food close to people are working. And on that note, I didn't see very much about green gardens and roofs. There was one reference to green gardens, and it was in the same statement as a green roof. Those two are not comparable. One is actually providing biodiversity, and the other is providing biodiversity for our wildflowers friends, but also for other humans in our community that can help to address food security issues. So again, I'm very eager to continue to see how, with quantum, which I also have been following very closely and I'm excited about, I'm also very well aware of the energy pull that is going to be necessary and the water pull that is going to be necessary, thus making it even more important that for a $45,000 square foot building, that there's going to be residential options and mandatory options nearby. These are the kinds of forward-thinking, blue line type opportunities that we must move forward and move forward quickly. If anything, my concern is that the former plans, the North Boulder plan, took 25 years, and that timeline is we really need to get moving and escalate towards these types of climate resilient strategies, approaches, and frameworks. So again, thank you so much for to you and the team, and I also echo the need for flexibility as much as possible. So thank you so much.
Thanks. I got Lauren, then I'll call on myself.
Thank you. I really want to appreciate staff for going back to community members and property owners after the first part of the public hearing. I think we're at a place where I just appreciate the compromises and changes that were made through that process. We might not be at 100% of what any one party really wanted to see out of this, but I think that it strikes a good balance of allowing both the kinds of, a variety of kinds of future development that we really want to see here, from the quantum computing hub to increased housing and 15-minute neighbor, more of being able to live and work together. I think it's great that we're allowing site review for any project, and the changes you've made with the production business space. I do look forward to hopefully the future creation of the fee in lieu program, because I think this could be an important part of helping keep certain kinds of industrial uses, light industrial here. And I also hope that we will continue to look at evolving and streamlining the form-based code as we see projects come through this new updated version. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll go, and then after that, Nicole. So I appreciate the comments from my colleagues. I think those were all well said, and just want to reiterate a little bit that I do appreciate all the extra work that you put in the last couple of months to get to where we are now. I think it's a really good place. I think it strikes a good balance, and you really heard our request for the optionality, and I think we've got a good mix here. And I think, Brad, I appreciated you waxing a little philosophical, because I think you hit the nail on the philosophical head here, which is that these area plans are not about dictating exactly what happens tomorrow, but for allowing for an evolution of this area of town over the coming years and decades. And people can continue with some of their existing plans, but also if they want to take advantage of the development potential, and then in the specific way required by the area plan, then that's an option as well. And so, and then just also I know there's been some conversation about the production space, other people have mentioned that. Given that it's only associated with the form-based code path and not the site review path, I'm comfortable leaving that in there, because the additional development potential on the form-based code path is very, very substantial. And so I feel like there's room for accommodating those uses in that scenario. If people go down the site review path, they don't have to worry about that requirement. So I think it works out. That being said, agree with Lauren that looking at potential future alternatives for limited cases where it's simply not feasible is something that's worth exploring as we go into future phases of the implementation on the plan. But looking forward to getting this passed tonight and seeing that gradual evolution start to get going. All right, I got Nicole and then Tara.
Thank you. And I just wanted to offer some general comments. Thank you so much for giving us all more time to think about this and for the additional work and meetings with community members. To staff, thank you for all that you did. I know a majority of us voted to extend the original public hearing to a later date out of sheer exhaustion. But from a process perspective, I'm really glad that we delayed rather than making last minute changes late in the night last fall. This is a really thoughtful set of final changes that is going to serve our city well for decades. And I just appreciate everyone for giving us this additional flexibility moving forward.
Thanks, Tara.
I just wanted to agree with what Matt said about making sure that we keep an eye on this area. Often on city council, so much happens every week that we don't even have time or remember to keep eyes on things. But I just want to double down and say we really need to. We all have a vision for this part of town being all that it can be. So how can we keep an eye? Who can remind us to keep an eye on this area? I'm just sometimes we say, let's look at this in a year or two. Remember back in the day, I think it was last term, we used to say, can we come back in a year or two to see how this is going? I'm not trying to push us into doing that, but I also want to make sure we do keep an eye in this area, make sure that it has all the flexibility that we need. And so I'm just throwing that out there. How can we do that?
Good question to keep in mind as we go forward. All right, I don't see any other hands. I will just offer, Nicole, you mentioned about the vote to delay. I was in the minority that wanted to finish it out. I confess that this has gone better than if we tried to finish it out. So I appreciate those of you at that time who suggested the delay, because I think it has been a successful one. And seeing no other hands, perhaps someone might get a motion going.
I'd like to start, but I want to clarify with the city attorney's office. Would you like me to make 2 motions or have these combined?
No, if you can please make 2 motions.
I thought you'd say that, but I wanted to verify. Thanks. All right, well then I'll go ahead and start with the first. I'd like to make a motion to amend the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, including the 55th and Arapahoe Station Area Plan, to align East Boulder Connections Plan with the refined vision for East Boulder areas of change and include additional supporting information.
Second.
All right, is this an amendment or roll call vote, Alicia?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's do it.
All right, we'll start the roll call for the amendment to the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan with Councilmember Marquis.
Yes.
Shuhart.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Reluctantly, no.
Duly noted. Thank you, sir. Weiner.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes, for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
And Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Yes.
The amendments to the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan are hereby approved with a vote of 8-1.
All right. Mayor Brock, if you don't mind me going after the second.
Councilmember Benjamin, take it away.
All right. I make a motion to amend as recommended by staff in the staff memorandum, Ordinance 8669, amending Title IX Land Use Code, BRC 1981, by adopting form-based code standards for parts of East Boulder, moving the form-based code from Appendix M to Chapter 9-14, form-based code BRC 1981, revising, rezoning, and trip reduction standards for East Boulder and setting forth related details.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. A roll call, please, Alicia.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll start the roll call for Ordinance 8669 with Councilmember Shuhart.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Wallach.
Again, no.
Weiner.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Folkerts.
Yes.
And Councilmember Marquis.
Yes.
Ordinance 8669 is hereby adopted with a vote of 8-1.
Excellent. All right. Well, that brings that item to a close. Just another huge thank you to all the staff members as well as our consultants for getting this program to the finish line. I know this has been a huge undertaking, and I'm excited to see where it leads us.
Thanks very much.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. Just before I gavel this close, I'll just check in to see if there's any last thoughts before we finish out here. Raise your hand or keep your peace. Taisha.
Yes, I actually just had a comment on the Environmental Advisory Board and the notes there. I wanted to apologize. I recognize that I have not received I did not share my my feedback to the climate action plan. And so the memo is drafted, people have, reviewing, and I'm just gathering more feedback, but so I apologize, and I'll just make sure and include that in the mid-year check-in, which is one of the agenda items I believe that you'll be talking about upcoming. So again, just wanted to express my apologies on that, but I also wanted to express my appreciation for also lifting up the importance and intersection of AI policy. And thank you to Jonathan Cohen and his team for lifting up the considerations around energy and water, as well as, again, the need for, and not him, but others on the committee talking about ethics and positive use, responsible use cases for the technology. So again, put a CAC hotline requesting more information about the guidance that has been provided to staff members who are currently using AI. And then also, once the team has developed our AI policy, just making sure that our community and council are aware of those policies, and again, understanding what the trade-offs are related to energy and water, and also how we are addressing the well-documented issues around bias and discrimination in those technologies that we are using. So again, thank you for your service. Those notes are not for naught. And same thing, thank you for the service of the TAB members as well. Appreciated to get an update on the work that you're doing. That's all I had for just the declaration components at this time.
Thanks. I got Ryan, and then we can wrap up.
I just want to recognize one of the commenters, Mr. James Linfield, and his poor mother, who is dealing with that pipe burst, and what a terrible, unfortunate situation. And I want you to know that I hear you and that we hear you, and wish you my best. And sorry you're going through that.
Thanks for that, Ryan. I think you speak for all of us, I imagine, there with our concern for that resident and the problems they're experiencing. Okay.
Sorry, Mayor, I did have one other thing. I was looking at the wrong piece of paper. I have another box that has not been checked. And that is to the community members who could express concerns around the content that was in the declaration. I want to honor and recognize that I hear those too, and those concerns. And I certainly appreciate the letter and of the 400 and folks, Jewish community members, and want to acknowledge all of our 35,000 community members, and of course the diversity of that rich community, and the rich traditions of our Jewish community, and again the diversity within the diversity. So again, I have extended and will continue to extend individual opportunities to meet with me, and I encourage everyone to sign up for my newsletter to find out. Actually, it is what I do in addition to standing up for the rights of all of our community members. So thank you so much for all of those who continue to come out, and thank you for my fellow council members for continuing to do the hard work to be the beloved community as this is Black History Month. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Taisha. All right, I'm going to call it here, 8:53 p.m. I'll bring us to a close. We're 25 minutes early. Thanks everybody for a good meeting.
Good night.